Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kara, and I'm with the Ohio LTAP Center here at ODOT, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Today's webinar is Ohio Safe Flagger Operations and Required PPE Training, and we're excited to have our very own Gary Browning as our presenter. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items to ensure a smooth webinar experience for everyone. Due to the number of attendees in today's webinar, Gary will not be taking questions throughout the presentation. If there is time at the end, he will open for questions. At this point, you will use the questions panel on your screen. You can type your questions there and he will answer them as time allows. I'm also going to be putting Gary's contact information in the chat for everyone, so you can reach out to him if you have any questions that don't get answered. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties or have any other issues, feel free to use the chat panel to communicate with our team and we'll do our best to assist you. Please note, this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all registered attendees after the session. All right, with that out of the way, let's get started. It's my pleasure to hand it over to Gary. Gary, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Kara. And good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on our Safe Flagger operations. So we'll be going through many aspects of this today, taking some time looking at the MUTCD, referencing the Ohio Supplemental, and then going through practical applications as well as the importance of personal protective equipment anytime we or our staff members are working around vehicular traffic. So with that being stated, we'll go ahead and get started. Here is my contact information if anybody would like to go ahead and jot that down. So my position here at the Ohio LTAP Center is a training program manager. But in addition to that, I'm also the safety circuit rider to the state. So if you are working at a local public agency within the state of Ohio and you would like to reach out to the Ohio LTAP office for referencing circuit rider training, where we can come and speak directly to you face to face, do an abbreviated session of work zone, other topics such as snow and ice, I would be the person that you would reach out to, and I would be here to be able to help you with that, as well as providing face-to-face training topics throughout the year. Also as a contact for you to be able to reach out if you would have any specific questions. As Kara mentioned, my contact information will be in the chat. So if you have any specific questions, you can always reach out to me and I'll do my best to get back with you and provide you those answers that you're looking for. All right, today's learning objectives. We want to take some time and we want to look at the MUTCD, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, as well as our new Ohio supplemental requirements as it pertains to us working in the roadway during flagger operations. We'll spend some time talking about the flagger's qualifications as well as responsibilities, looking at necessary equipment and clothing that would reference our PPE, and then also the importance of proper flagging procedures, the signs that are needed, as well as proper flagging locations. We'll look at uniform flagging procedures and how they are applied depending on the type of operation that's being performed. We know that many times in our local public agencies, our two-lane road work can vary from things that are going to be static in one position for a length of time, and sometimes it even moves into moving and mobile operations where we're still deploying flaggers for safety of the road work area as well as the road users. So we need to have an understanding that there's going to be different things that apply as far as keeping everyone safe. And with that, we want the development of safety habits to maintain safe working conditions for our employees and our motorists around and through our work areas. So with the PowerPoint, hopefully you'll get some insight in how you can help be able to design these things, designing your flagging operations to be the safest that it can be for different speed limits in your municipalities. All right, so here we're going to reference our Ohio standards in Part 6 of the MUTCD. The MUTCD and the Ohio Supplemental Manual establishes the standards for design and use of traffic control devices on all public roadways in Ohio. And this is going to be per sections of the ORC 4511.09 and 4511.11. As a reference too, we have these manuals available to you for download, and I'll show you that here just in a moment. To reference the ORC, local authorities and their respective jurisdictions shall place and maintain traffic control devices in accordance with the Department of Transportation manual and specifications for a uniform system of traffic control devices. One of the biggest things that I have learned through 30 years of local public agency experience, that the big word that's important in there is that uniformity. Being able to have uniform work design so that we are all following in compliance with the manual for uniform traffic control devices. So that if somebody is driving through your work zone in your community, and if you drive clear across the country, every work zone that you go through should be the same, to develop the standardization, the uniformity, the control efforts, so that motorists know exactly what to expect, and prayerfully the workers will able to communicate effectively that they'll know what to expect. Within our typical applications within the manual uniform traffic control devices, there's going to be pictures that are available. These pictures are commonly referred to as typical applications. They're going to be a drawing on a page. They're going to show many different typical applications for all types of work zone environments that you might find yourself in. Anything from single lane, two lane roadways, multi-lane roadways, freeways, and expressways, all in an effort to give you some sort of a plan and an understanding, so that as you are beginning to build your plan for your work zone, it's a starting place for deployment. From there, you're going to start making different types of alterations. As you look at typical applications, there's going to be many variables such as the location of work, the highway type, geometrics of roadways, vertical alignments, intersections and interchanges, and all the different things that are available. And so one thing we've got to realize is that when I'm looking at a drawing on a piece of paper, it's not real life. And because it's not real life, there's going to be sometimes that necessary alteration that has to be made. What we want to do is to know what the manual says, so that when we're making alterations, our alterations do not put us in a situation to become a violation. And we've seen that happen many times, unfortunately, throughout the years, where somebody makes an alteration to a work zone. However, the alteration that's made puts them into a situation where there's a violation. One of the ways that this happens most frequently, sadly, is with retroreflectivity of temporary traffic control devices. Let's say that you have a local public agency that sets out with the efforts of doing a work throughout a daytime operations. They put all their signs out, perfectly and legal. They put out their taper, they put out their tangent lines, they've got their workspace and buffer space, and everything is exactly specific to what it's supposed to be. But then let's say they decide to add some more temporary devices to that. And now within their work zone, they have an intermix of reflective cones as well as non-reflective cones. Now, during the daytime, this might be extremely safe, as the devices are going to be much closer together. But let's say the devices, let's say the task doesn't get completed during the daytime, and now that work zone is required to stay out overnight so that the crew can come back and finish up their work the next morning. They would have to go through the work area and make sure that they remove every non-reflective device. There was a previous accident had happened some time ago in a municipality where this exact thing took place. And late that night, there was a person who was driving down the roadway at a fast rate of speed, somewhat under the influence. They were approaching the work zone that was properly signed and had the retroreflective items that were out there, but intermixed with non-reflective items. The the person was on a motorcycle who had decided to enter into that work zone thinking that they were going to do slalom efforts, practice their slalom skills on their motorcycle, only to be surprised by the fact that there was non-reflective devices, causing them to wreck their motorcycle, injure themselves very badly. This unfortunately turned into violations and citations and lawsuits, which would have held the local public agency responsible, because of the alteration that was made that was safe and legal during the daytime became a violation at night. So please take heed to that. Go through your devices, inspect them, make sure that they're in good working order. And if you're putting devices on the roadway and there is the chance that those devices are going to stay out overnight, make sure all of your devices and signage are always retro-reflective. All right, let's take a look at our standards and the guidance and our support option information that goes along with these pictures. So as you would go through and you would see your typical applications, you would also have items that you need to read along with that. With these items, you're going to see it broke down in these forms. The standard is going to be a shall condition. These are conditions that we have to do. You're then going to read through guidance, options, and support information. So guidance many times is looked at as a should, but it is something that absolutely still needs to be referenced and incorporated into your work zones. Within our standards and guidance, we're also going to have options and support information that accompanies that in an effort to help us build safe and legal work zones. So when we see our standards, one thing that's nice about typical applications with giving us something visual to look at with the drawing is that even the items that you're going to read are still going to be visual in that nature. So the standards are going to jump out off the page to you because they're all going to be written in large, bold text. After that, you're going to have the guidance. The guidance is that should information that we previously spoke about, and it's going to be shown visually in italic text, not bold. And then your options and your support information to accompany the standards and the guidance are going to be written in the smaller, just normal text, so not boldened and also not italic. So giving us that visual aspect that as we're picking out a typical application that most fits what our work zone environment is going to look like, we can now read through standards, guidance, and options to be able to reference different items to make this work zone as safe as it can possibly be. Now, here's an example of one. This would be typical application 10, lane closure on a 2-lane road using flaggers. As you would go through this, you'll see how those different variations are broke down. Now, many times the typical applications will all look different. Sometimes all of the standards, the boldened words will all be up at the top, and then it'll be very systematic that it will then go to the italicized and then to the regular text. Sometimes they may be broken up like typical application 10, but it still is a good guide that as we're looking at the typical application drawing for deployment, we're also going to take the time to read this to be able to give us that extra guidance that we need working through our work zones. Now, with our MUTCD and our Ohio supplemental, digital copies of these are available and can be found at your LTAP Center's website. On the website, there are going to be postcards at the bottom of the page, different things that you can click on to download. Many print resources are available. You're going to find this through the technical assistance, services, and resources link. It's also good to note that when you click on the link to go download the manual, you're going to get the option to download both. And so when you go to the Ohio Department of Transportation's page, the very first hyperlink that's going to be on that link is going to show you the federal manual. You're going to want to download that to have reference of it. Underneath that link, the secondary, you're going to see the Ohio supplemental link so that you can click on it and download it and reference it as well. All right, so some of you that's been on the job for a long time may remember the little booklets that the LTAP Center and Ohio Department of Transportation previously had printed, and they were nice. They had typical applications that were inside of them. They were a very quick resource for us to have, especially if you were putting them in work trucks out in the field so that work crews could very quickly reference them for what to do. Uh, this was a nice option, but we've got something that's going to be even better that we have improved because like with anything that's printed in paper or a little flip book that's going to be in a truck, we know that it stands the chance of being damaged, lost, or stolen. So we've provided a digital resource that I'll talk to you about here just in a minute. So just be advised that these will not be printed moving forward, and the links to be able to print them as well are going to be removed from the website. But within the book, what we had previously and what has been moved to a digital copy now is going to be devices and tables to be able to show us the different spacing differences that we need for signage on roadways depending on speed. All the calculations are already done for spacing of channelizing devices, as well as even laying out tapers and flagger station distances that very easily you could look at the speed of your roadway, look at the width of the lane that you're working in, and the mathematical equations were already done for you. Again, it had pictures of typical applications that were in there, like referenced on your screen now. You'll see TA10, which is the flagging application. You'll see how the drawing is in the form of a curved roadway, but you can also make that personal application to any type of environment that you're working in. Maybe instead of a curve, that's a hill. It's still going to show you safe placement of a flagger. It's going to show you safe placement and legal required spacing for those signs. And if you're working on a roadway that's just as straight as it can be, this typical application is still going to work for that. With lots of different things that are out there, other typical applications were available in this booklet as well. You also had work activity matrices that were available. So if you still didn't know what typical application necessarily that you wanted to go reference, you could go reference them based on the work type, and it would show you what that best typical application would be. Now, I mentioned that that book was previous, that it's no longer going to be available for purchase or for print. What your LTAP Center has done is they've worked together with Ohio Department of Transportation, and they have built an application that can be downloaded to your phone. So on your screen, you're going to see QR codes. With those QR codes, depending on what your device is, go ahead and scan that, and you're going to be able to download that pocketbook guide for free, no subscription, no background running advertisements and things of that nature that a lot of our apps have, but it's going to give you that LTAP app in the palm of your hand that's always going to be with you. We always have a device with us, don't we? Our phones, our tablets, and so forth. So I encourage everybody to download this to your phone. There are many apps that are available that are out there. Because we're talking about Work Zone, we're talking about Flagger. This is the one I'm sharing with you now. But we have other ones that are available. One's for sign placement, one's for safe roadways. You can get into the Ohio Department of Transportation's website. They have apps that are available to download. And then there are still yet even more out there. Underground Utility Protection Services have an app. The railroad has an app. These apps are great to be able to put on employees' devices, to have for either a city provided, government provided phone, or even a personal device, because it's always going to be with you, helping you stay safe and informed when you're out there working. All right. So with our federal manual for uniform traffic control, we also talked about the Ohio supplemental. There is also the potential that local jurisdictions could have their own standards as long as they are in substantial conformance with the MUTCD as well as the Ohio supplemental, and they have to meet and exceed those state and federal standards. Now, as I've traveled around Ohio and I've been in many different municipalities, everything from townships to the counties, to the different villages and cities, I have yet to find some community that has done this. But in the event that there is, please know that if your community has additional standards that they are meeting and exceeding federal and state guidelines that they are imposing upon their work that's being done in the city, you have to make sure that you know those so that you're meeting those as well. So just a quick review, get handy with it, print off copies of it from the website, but always get familiar with referencing those manuals. The manual for uniform traffic control devices, our newest one through federal 2023, as well as the brand new Ohio supplemental 2025. All right, let's talk about some statistics here just for a moment. How many work zone fatalities happened in 2025 in Ohio? Now, you don't have to answer this or put this in the chat. It's just something for you to think about. This is something that gets tracked through safety, and it's just an interesting thought to think about why it's so important for us to do everything that we can do to be safe on the roadways. All right, let's take a look at these statistics. So we'll see in 2025, work zone fatalities were ranked at 17. When you look back through the years and you go back to 2021, and you'll see that we had 25 fatalities back in 2021. If you're to compare 17 to 25, we could all agree that 17, being a lesser number, is better. But is that a good number? No, it is not, because that is still too many. So what number should we be shooting for? That number should always be zero. We are aiming for zero fatalities on Ohio roadways at all costs that we can try to provide, especially when it comes to our work zones, because many times these fatalities are involving our folks that are on foot working, boots on the ground in these work areas when things are happening. So it's very important that we're doing everything that we can do to be legal and be safe while we're in the roadway. Now, as far as 2026, already this year, we were able to see the confirmation that we've already had the first, if not two, fatalities. So we've got to get this out in front of all of our communities so that we're doing the best that we can do to be safe. Now, when we look at work zone serious injuries over the same amount of years, you see that in 2026, we've already recorded two. 2025's number was at 94. Again, looking back to 2021, we see the number being as high as 114. And is 94 a better number? It is a lower number, but it is not better. Excuse me. Because to me, in my opinion, a serious injury just means an almost fatality. So that's almost 94 more fatalities. So let us gather together to make sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to do to be as safe and legal as possible. When we look at total overall work zone crashes for 2025, we see 4,419. And with this year in 2026, we already have a recorded 277 work zone crashes. When we look at work zone area and we start compiling these fatalities and injuries that are happening, for those of you that's had work zone class in the past, you're going to notice that there's these different areas of your work zone. You have the advanced warning area where you have sign placements out, the worker ahead, the lane road, lane closed ahead, a flagger sign that's ahead. You've got the transition area, which is going to be that taper area for traffic to be able to start moving from their lane that they were in to the intended lane that we're putting them in. And then you have that activity area. The activity area is going to be composed of a buffer space as well as that workspace. Noticing the amount of accidents that we've had happening, the amount of fatalities and injuries from work zone crashes. The majority of these are happening in that activity area. That should be very alarming to all of us. Yes, there are accidents or crashes that are happening back at these other locations, but primarily the most of them, they're happening right where our workers have boots on the ground. And so when we have our face-to-face classes, and I'm out teaching this to all the municipalities, I spend a lot of time talking about not being so complacent in the work that you're doing, not having blinders on and being so focused in on one specific part of a task that you do not have situational awareness. So you have to have situational awareness at all times, and not only for yourself, but also for the workers that you're working with. In a previous experience that I had, we were working on a two-lane rural road. We had everything set up legal and correct. We had our signs out. We had flaggers deployed. We had the proper taper. We had everything set up that was supposed to be exactly what it was. But we had a new employee that was on the crew that was trying to learn the aspects of this task that we were completing. This employee did not have the situational awareness just yet. But thankfully for the employee that was there trying to learn, the folks that the person was working with did have this background, because the new employee inadvertently started to take a little step backwards, not realizing that he was stepping back past the double yellow line as a very disrespectful driver decided to speed recklessly through the work zone. Had another employee had not had situational awareness, the employee that stepped out past the double yellow line could have very quickly become a serious injury or a fatality. So it's important that we remind our folks when they're on the roadway, when you're out working and you're in your activity areas, yes, we want you to be focused on the task at hand. Yes, we want you to be effective and we want you to be efficient. We want you to be safe, but remind them to have situational awareness so that their head is basically on a swivel. They're listening, their ears are opening, and they're ready to take action to protect themselves, to have an escape route, to be able to get out of the way should an errant vehicle come through the work zone and potentially lose control. It's sad to say, but this activity area is where the majority of these incidents are being recorded at. So what is the main hazard for flagging? We know that as we look across the country, motorists kill about 20 flaggers each year. This is an average number. It's not an exact number, but it should still be a staggering number to us to remember that this is a very dangerous thing that we're doing. We have got to make sure that we're doing everything appropriately. Flagging can be very dangerous, especially when you start working with high-speed traffic. You're dealing with angry and aggressive drivers. And there are other things that are on the roadway that drivers are dealing with, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. After seeing a flagger, the motorist is going to take, let's say it's going 60 miles an hour, they're going to need almost 40 or 400 feet to come to a stop. So many times, speed of vehicles plays into the role of potential accidents happening. So we need to do our best to be safe on the roadways. Now you can go, this is a screenshot from the Ohio Department of the Highway Patrol. They have a dashboard that you can access. It's very interesting. You can pull up the state of Ohio. You can see what total crashes are around the state. And then if you want to get a little bit further into the weeds, you can go into the county. You can go into the type of crash that was recorded. For this particular presentation, I went to the website and I pulled out not only what the total crashes were in our state, but then also just looking at what the crashes were that were being recorded and work zone related crashes. So something very interesting if you would like to take the time to go back and have a look at that. All right, let's talk about one crash in particular. So if you're aware of who PERP is, PERP is the Public Employees Risk Reduction Program. They're basically OSHA for the local public agency. They're going to be imposing the Code of Federal Regulations for different workplace violations and things that are happening. PERP and LTAP have worked together quite frequently in an effort to try to get safety, communication, and training out there to our local public agencies. I took the time to review the last 7 years of violations that have been written to local public agencies, and leading the majority of these violations comes down to PPE, comes down to work zone. So wearing the proper PPE with the ANSI rated garments for roadway and time, having out a safe and legal work zone with the advanced warning and the tapers and everything that is required with that. And we see that there's a great need to make sure that we're having these trainings so that you're aware of it. Here's one particular crash that we have permission to share that happened back in around 2015. The road crew was out working on a roadway. They were going out to do what I believe was crack sealing, some form of a road maintenance repair. And take a look at the dynamic of the roadway. You have a roadway that has curves to it, it has hills and dips. You have a canopy of trees that's overshadowing the roadway, immediately met with blinding sun. The crew that was going out to do the maintenance efforts of that roadway, it was somewhat maybe of a relatively a short section of road. They thought, hey, let's just get out, let's get after it, let's get it done so that we can get back to the shop and maybe get on to the next task. So at one end of the roadway, they put up one sign. At the far end of the roadway, they put up another sign. And then they proceeded to have a moving and mobile work zone, if you will, as they went down the roadway doing their sealing project. However, as they were doing this work, the flaggers that they were using were not equipped to flag appropriately. They were neither trained nor were they using stop and slow paddles. And if you remember taking a look at these pictures for how the roadway is made, the geometrics of the road, as soon as a motorist would pull out of a driveway and get down the roadway, they would immediately be up to or above the safe operating speed of that roadway. They would come over a hill, enter into a curve, and immediately be surprised by a flagger. And so sadly, this is exactly what happened. So PERP gets involved and PERP begins to do their investigation for exactly what happened. As they look into the investigation and they're documenting everything that was reported and how it happened, we start looking at the citation number. We start looking at all the references that were made. And every reference at the time was still the Ohio Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the OMUTCD, but the same thing is still going to apply today. They're going to go through that federal manual. They're going to go through the Ohio supplemental, and we have to do our part to make sure that we are upholding these things for our roadways anytime that we're in the road working. As you look through the citation, you'll see the Code of Federal Regulations that is also being quoted, and you'll see what their findings probably were. And so we have to know that it is very important that we have to have trained employees that can work and be competent persons while they're out working in the roadway, so that everything is safe and legal to try to prevent these disasters from happening. And this is not to put any shame on any local public agency, such as this one, who had to experience such a hardship, but it should be a reminder to all of us to remember these things, that this is something that is very plausible. This is something that can happen to every single one of us if we're out there and we're not doing what we're supposed to do and we're not staying alert with that situational awareness. All right, let's continue moving on. So we know that flaggers are going to be very critical to traffic safety, and the consequences of improper flagging may be severe, if not fatal, like we've just discussed. Flaggers have very important responsibilities. Why is flagging an important position? Well, the fact is that lots of people are depending on the flagger's clear guidance. So let's think about those people. You've got the co-workers that are working. They're working in a workspace. They're trying to perform whatever the maintenance or inspection operation is. The flaggers are controlling the roadway. The fellow co-workers are relying on the flaggers to have proper control of that roadway and communication. The motorists that are driving up the roadway, they are relying on the flaggers' clear and concise communication to keep them safe. to let them know that it's time to stop, that they need to slow down, or that they can be released to travel past the work area. And then we think about all road users, including vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians, such as bicyclists. Many of our communities have the e-scooters and the e-bikes. And lastly, and not to say least, but the flaggers themselves. The flaggers are relying on one another. It is absolutely critical that we make sure our flaggers are trained. The problem is, and that I have found this throughout my 30 years of experience, is that many times the maintenance road members do not like the flag. So the fellas and the ladies that have all the experience, they have the wisdom and years and training, they choose that they don't want to flag. So then who gets stuck flagging? Well, typically it's going to end up being that new person that just got hired in that may not have even been trained yet. It's going to be that college intern. It's going to be that summer seasonal. It's going to be that brand new full-time employee. They're going to get handed the flag paddles and say, you're going to be the flagger because you don't know how to do this other part of the task just yet. And we have to understand that we are in great violation by doing that, because just look at the fact that we're all relying on them. If I'm in that work area, I am relying on those flaggers for my own safety. And if that flagger that I'm relying on has not yet been trained and is not knowledgeable themselves, now I've put myself at risk. So let us make sure that we see the need to do that, that flaggers absolutely must be trained. Now, as we take the time and we go through and we look at our manual for uniform traffic control devices and we look at the flagging procedures, we're going to find those standards. And there's many things that are going to be bullet pointed in there. So let's just take a moment to look at some of these and what a flagger must be able to do. So we know having flaggers out there and following these procedures is going to increase motorist respect. It's going to promote a uniform response. Remember, we talked about when we read through that Ohio Revised Code. It's that standardization. We want that uniform response, and we want to do our best to try to minimize drivers' confusion on the roadway. Flaggers must stay alert at all times. Flaggers must face oncoming traffic. They must be highly visible. They must stand alone, and they must stay on the shoulder. They must stay out of the path of other vehicles. Now, you can probably admit there's times that maybe you've been driving down the road and you've approached a work zone and you've had flaggers that were controlling that roadway, and you probably have seen almost every one of these things being violated. And that's the problem. Those are the things that we've got to communicate to our workers so that they're not. They've got to stay alert at all times, being in control of that roadway. It's very easy to get complacent, especially maybe on a roadway that has low traffic. And so their mind starts to wander and they're looking around at the environment, but you have to stay alert. Many times we'll find flaggers that are standing at different locations on the roadway and not necessarily on the side of the road where they're supposed to be at, not facing the oncoming traffic. Maybe they're out there and they're not wearing the proper ANSI garments for that roadway. We're going to talk more about that with ANSI Class 2 and ANSI Class 3. Or we'll find our flaggers that they'll be standing right up with that work area. They'll be standing right up against a pickup truck or whatever type of mobility vehicle that they use to be out into that work zone. The flagger has to stand alone so that they are completely separate and being visual and being seen. They must stay on that shoulder and they must stay out of the path of the roadway from that vehicular travel. Flaggers must demonstrate the following. They must have the ability to communicate instructions. They must have the ability to be able to maneuver quickly, have the ability to control their signaling devices, their stop and slow paddles. If you're using an AFAD, an automatic flagging assistance device, they have to have the correct understanding of how to control signaling devices. They must have the ability to apply safe traffic control practices. That means they have to understand what the MUTCD says. What does the Ohio manual say? The supplemental manual. And they must have the ability to recognize dangerous traffic situations in one of others. Many times this is like that spidey sense. I'm sure there's probably a few of you laughing right now at that. But you're looking down the roadway and you just get the hair on the back of your neck standing up that this approaching vehicle might be a problem. And that's something that the flagger learns through years of understanding of what it's like to be on a roadway. So why would we take a brand new summer seasonal, a college intern, that brand new full-time employee that has not yet been trained to have a clear understanding of flagging operations in the MUTCD, put them out in the roadway to control that roadway when so many people are going to be relying on them for their safety as well as the flagger being safe. I hope that you're starting to see the importance of why we have to have proper flagger training. When we start talking about flagging equipment, primarily we know we're talking about our stop and slow paddles. So you have a stop and slow paddles that need to be retro-reflective, especially for anything being used at nighttime. Now there's two sizes of paddle that's available. The minimum size that you can use is going to be an 18-inch by 18-inch. There are larger paddles that are available, such as the 24-inch by 24-inch, and typically these are going to be mounted on a high rigid handle, usually 5 foot to 7 foot high. The manual would say that being the sign being mounted to a post support, that it needs to be high enough so that the approaching vehicles can adequately see it so that they are getting that communication. When we look at our stop and slow paddles, we're going to see, because we were talking about uniformity and standardization, notice the stop sign. This is a regulatory stop sign. It is an enforceable stop sign. So I always tell my folks that if you're out working and you're having problems where the motorists in the community are not obeying the flagger controls, they're not obeying the stop sign, to make a phone call to that local public agency, the police department, maybe the local sheriff's deputy, and ask if somebody can come by and maybe just sit adjacent to that work zone, because this is absolutely a regulatory stop sign. Now look at the uniformity and the standardization of the slow side. It's going to match up with just like all the other requirements that we will have with our temporary controls and our advanced signing. So you have that orange diamond, you have the bold black letters, all in an effort to be as visual and communicating as clear as possible to motorists. Well, what about using the old school flags? Many of you may have some of these still laying around. You may still be using them, but here's what we find with our update, with our new manual. The use of these flags should be limited to emergency situations only. We need to start taking the effort of operating with stop and slow paddles alone. How about channelizing devices? So we know when we start talking about our channelizing devices, we're primarily talking about anything that we're using to help us control that traffic. So this might be your cones, you might be using grabber cones, you might be using some form of a panel or a barrel. But our channelizing devices direct traffic from one lane to another. They guide travelers along a safe path. Now they can be hazards themselves if we're not appropriately using them. Like I shared the story about the crash that happened in the one community with the motorcyclists. Their channelizing devices actually became a hazard. And why? Because they had non-reflective devices on the roadway at nighttime in addition to the reflective devices. So we know that there's guidance in how we're using them, the length of what tapers are, the maximum amount of space that cones can be spread apart. We have to have that understanding to how to do that appropriately. Warning signs as needed. So depending on the roadway that you're working on, the speed of that roadway, the amount of traffic that's going to be there, the warning signs are going to be potentially needed at all times. And remember that everything on that roadway has to be retro reflective for night use. Proper flagging PPE, let's talk about this. This is a big one. And a lot of times I find that this is challenging for a lot of local public agencies because there has been some changes as time has went on, and there have been updates to what is required for the roadway. Now you'll notice in the picture that I have three different types of vests that are listed. Now a long time ago, it used to be known as ANSI Class 1, ANSI Class 2, ANSI Class 3. Well, now the previous ANSI Class 1 is no longer permitted to be worn in or around the roadway where there's vehicular traffic. It's only allowed to be worn indoors or in controlled environments. So now what it's considered is a non-rated. A non-rated article of garment is no different than you wearing anything else that you're wearing to work that day. Those vests can no longer be worn in or around that roadway. So what do we go to now? Now we see that we have an ANSI Class 2 and we have an ANSI Class 3. ANSI Class 2 garments, if you look at the difference compared to that previously rated Class 1, look at how much more retroreflective material is going to be on the employee that wears it. The previous vest, they had no retroreflective material on the sides of the wearer. And so it was just a little elastic strap that kind of kept the back and the front together. But now you actually have retroreflective straps to go all the way around your side. So if you're standing in the roadway and an approaching vehicle and you standing sideways, they still have an opportunity to see something reflective on the worker who is wearing it. Your ANSI Class 2 garments, they're going to be rated for 25 to 50 miles an hour. So if we're working in daytime operations and up to 50 mile an hour, you can wear a Class 2. But what we find out is that there's also a requirement to move on over to the ANSI Class 3. ANSI Class 3 is going to be daytime operations above 50 mile an hour or any time we're working at night. So if we're working at nighttime, we need to be in ANSI Class 3. If we're working in roadway speeds where the speeds are in excess of 50 mile an hour, we need to be in ANSI Class 3. So that's a quick understanding. Many communities are starting to forego ANSI Class 2 and they're purchasing ANSI Class 3 so that the employees have what they have year round. Because how many times do we have job sites that we're out working on and maybe the job runs long, or maybe you get a call in the night and you've got an emergent situation that you've got to respond to, and now you're out working. If all you've provided your employees is ANSI Class 2, you're potentially putting them in a safety risk as well as a violation. So keep in mind, ANSI Class 2 is daytime operations only up to 50 mile an hour. ANSI Class 3 is day and night operations and speeds above 50 mile an hour. But think just for a minute, what's some additional PPE that could we use? If we were going to take the time today and we were going to build a toolbox, let's say we were going to put this little toolbox over into a pickup truck for all the flaggers to have, what are some low cost safety measures? What are things that we could add to that to promote safety of our workers? I think about things like having a flashlight with a red glow cone that's on it in the event that they have to go out at nighttime. I think about road flares, and not necessarily the old road flares that you would strike and that would actually burn with fire, but now they have made LED road flares that are rechargeable pucks. Some of these pucks, you can purchase them and set them on the ground next to a flagger just as an additional communication. They're making LED lights that you can add to your stop and slow paddles. And I've even seen the safety vests that come with LED lights that still carry the ANSI rating, depending on if it's a class 2 or a class 3. So lighting could be something that would be very informative. If you remember when we went through the slide, and we talked about what are the things that a flagger must be able to do. One of those things was communicate. They've got to be able to communicate with the folks that are in that work area. So what's something that we could throw in this toolbox that would be very cheap, that in the event that there was an errant vehicle coming up the roadway, that the flagger would have something to be able to alert the road crew. Because if the road crew is working around very loud pieces of equipment, they probably have their ear protection in, and the flagger could scream to the top of their lungs and the road crew would never hear it. But what about something as cheap as a little air horn? An air horn like you might take to the football game. Or maybe you've got one on your boat in the event that the battery horn quits working. Having something small like that, a little $5 or $10 air horn, would be something that that flagger could have with them when they're on the roadway. And when the road crew hears that air horn blow, they know that, hey, we've got to turn and look the direction that came from because something very bad is about to potentially happen. So something like that would be helpful. And I think about police officers. Police officers many times carry whistles, and they'll have a whistle that's attached to a lapel and placed in a pocket just so that they can get better communication with a vehicle that they may be near. So even adding a whistle to this toolkit could be another low cost safety measure to be able to improve the safety of the roadway as well as our workers. Now with whistles, if you decide to go that route, as we learn about them, they have a difference between one that has the little bouncy ball in it, like a pea, and then they have ones that don't have the pea. So what we're told is that you should buy a pealess whistle because if you're using it during the winter time, you're doing it when there's condensation and moisture in the air, that it's liable to fill up with that, and then the whistle will actually not be able to work. So like with our police officers, they're using a pealess whistle. So just think about those things. And I'm sure there's still many more things that we could add to this toolbox, but I encourage everybody to put something together like that, just in an effort to promote even further safety for the road user, the road worker. So let's get back and remind ourselves about the clothing that we were talking about with our safety apparel. We're talking about ANSI Class 2, ANSI Class 3. Now, many of you may only have ANSI Class 2 garments available. It's all that you've purchased and it's what you have. Remember, those Class 2 articles are only good for daytime operations, less than 50 mile an hour. We're going to have Class 3 is going to be required anytime we're working at nighttime or we're working at speeds that are above 50. So you may be asking yourself, well, what am I going to do? How can I make my class 2 article, my class 2 vest or t-shirt or whatever it is that you have into a class 3 rating? And well, we've got an answer for that. Many of you might be buying high vis rain gear. You got a high-vis jacket, you got high-vis pants. Putting on those high-vis rain pants, if they carry an ANSI rating, are going to get you into class 3. They also make what's called a highway pant. Highway pants are kind of a cheesecloth material. They're still going to be in the fluorescent green or the fluorescent orange color, depending on what you're purchasing. They will have retroreflective banding that is sewed into them, and they are going to carry an approved ANSI rating so that you can then make that class 2 vest, all of a sudden make the employee have a class 3 rating. They're also making what's called a high vis gaiter. And so gaiters, for my outdoorsmen, you know what gaiters are if you're going into the woods and it's warm out and you're protecting your legs from potential venomous snake bites. Well, they're making gaiters that kind of look like that. They're elastic. They're made out of that cheesecloth. They'll be the high vis fluorescent color. They'll have retroreflective material sewn into them. Elastically, they'll go up to your knee and hang down over your boot. Wearing something that's approved like that is going to make a class 2 vest all of a sudden now become a class 3 rating for the employee. The thing to look for is that those extra garments that we just spoke about, rain pants, highway pants, high vis gaiters, and so on, make sure that if it doesn't already say on the tag that the tag says that it's class 2, it may actually say class E. So any approved class E rating article of clothing, class E added to my class 2 vest, will automatically put me into a class 3 rating. What's the problem with things? Well, we know that we go out in the marketplace and everybody is selling construction garments nowadays. You can go to any TSC and Rural King and Meijer and Walmarts, and every place you go, you can probably find some type of high vis garment. The problem is not all the garments that are high vis are going to carry an ANSI rating. They're not going to be ANSI compliant. So you take a look at the articles of clothing that are on my screen right now. Which one do you think is an ANSI rated garment? Which one might not be? It's hard to tell. So how do we know? Well, the idea is going to be for you to go look at the tag on the garment. If you look at the tag on the garment, sometimes they're sewn in at the neck. I've seen them sewn in at the sleeve, maybe on the stitching down around the waist where you would tuck your shirt in at. You're going to find this tag just like you see in your picture today. You're going to see the ANSI federal rating. You're going to see that 107. And then it's going to show you what the classification is for that garment. So this particular garment that's pictured is going to be a class 2. So think about it. What did I say class 2 is good for? Daytime operations only and speeds less than 50 mile an hour. This particular garment also has an expiration listed on the tag that it says that it's good or guaranteed up to 25 cycles, so 25 washes. Now, does that mean that I have to throw these shirts away after every 25 washes? Not necessarily, because it depends on how hard the employee is and what the work is that they're doing, how hard they are on the garment. Some tasks are very dirty and they're very arduous, and you may go through t-shirts and garments much faster. Some are very clean and not so much, and you may be able to get more than 25 cycles out. But the point that I want each of you on the webinar today to listen and hear is that they wear out. So there's going to be points and times where you're going to have to replace your articles of clothing. You're going to have to get a new vest. Now, I've seen this go both ways in my career. I've seen employees that absolutely do not want to give up their safety vest. They finally got it broke in. It's comfortable. It's worn to them. They feel proud of maybe the the stains and the debris that are on it, but they've got to understand that that retroreflectivity wears out and it's got to be replaced. On the other side of that, I've seen places where maybe the actual managers are struggling to want to give out new replacement articles. Well, please understand that your employees are going to need it. There is a life expectancy and there is a need for us to provide it, and there is a need for the employee to wear it. So make sure that we're in good, bright, visible clothing for that road system that we're on, whether it's day or night. Take a look at our flagger here. This flagger is very visible. Now I want you to think to yourself, what classification do you think that vest is? Well, if you're saying to yourself it's a class 3, you'd absolutely be right. But notice that he still has highway pants on. So even if his vest was class 2, he would still be in a class 3. Now, just because you've got a class 3 jacket, a class 3 vest, or a shirt does not mean that you don't still need to wear the pants. The more visible, the more brighter you can be, the safer and better that it's going to be for you on that roadway working at the edge of vehicular traffic. As we would look at our manual, we would see that it will talk about preferred flaggers locations. One thing we got to understand is that we are to never stand in the path of moving vehicles. You should never be standing in the lane of traffic, operating your flagging panel, trying to get people approaching cars to come to a stop. We have to be on the shoulder at the beginning of the taper on lane closures and be away from all other vehicles. So if I drive a pickup truck out and I park it at the beginning of that taper, I need to separate myself from that truck. All right, let's keep moving forward and we'll look a little deeper into this. This is just a picture for reference. Utility crew was out working, performing some flagging, and what you see identified in the picture is what's called an AFAD, automatic flagger assistance device. Sometimes they'll work in parallel. There could be two of them. You have lights that are on the panels, one being red that corresponds with the stop and one being yellow for caution. And it also has that drop arm with a flag on it. This particular crew that was out working was using one singular AFAD in addition to an actual human flagger to be able to control the roadway. So there's lots of resources that are out there available for you. I encourage you to look into what's best for you. All right, so we're talking about our flagging locations. Let's first look at some examples of how not to flag traffic, and not to poke fun at anybody, but some of these are pretty fun pictures to look at. But I want you to think about the things that we've already discussed, what the manual says that we shall do when we're out in the roadway, and then start thinking about some of the violations and the potential incidents that could happen to these pictures. So looking at our flagger here, not being attentive, out actually in the lane of roadway next to a vehicle. He's supposed to be standing alone, even though he's wearing a very nice Class 2 vest. He has a very nice stop and slow paddle that's the 24-inch one on a fiberglass pole. Great stuff. But now look at all the violations. These are the things that we're seeing repeatedly that we've got to make sure that we're correcting. How about this situation here? Where's the flagger at? Look at the geometrics of this roadway. We're in an area that's got a lot of tree canopy overhanging the roadway, potential blinding sun. The roadway is a curve. And now look where the flagger was intending to be. Currently, while the picture is taking, they're not present for the task. So who's actually controlling the work area? If you look right there behind the 2.5-ton dump truck, you'll see somebody standing directly on the double yellow line. Maybe that's the flagger, and he or she moved up to that point to flag. This is illegal flagging. We'll talk later about how many different types of flaggers we need in different situations, and there is the time to have one singular flagger. This is not that time. This is a violation. Now, if the flagger were back at their stop and slow paddle, look at the violations and what's wrong with that. There's no flagger station. They're not separate from all other equipment in the workspace. They're intending to be out in the middle of that roadway. And then look at how close to the curve that they are, that the approaching vehicles coming and going may even have difficulty as they're approaching this work area. So these things are absolutely wrong that we have to correct. What about this situation here? We know that sometimes in our local public agencies, we get stuck with some pretty difficult areas to work on, and we find ourselves just trying to do the best that we can do. We still have to make sure we're doing what's appropriate. Here we see the taper, the distance of the taper and the separation of the cones is correct. But because they're setting up right at this intersection at State Route 739, everything is very compacted. And now you have a flagger wearing a legal ANSI Class 2 vest. They've got a stop and slow paddle, fiberglass pole. Those things are great. But then somebody comes out and says, "Come here, I need to talk to you for a minute." And now they pull the flagger out of their safe location on the edge of the roadway prior to the taper. And now the flagger is actually standing in the work area at that taper. This is a violation, and this could potentially make the roadway unsafe, not only for the workers and the flagger, but also those approaching vehicles. How about this flagger here? What's some things that you can think about that might be wrong here? Remember, we talked about the different vests, and we said that back previously there was an ANSI Class 1 that is now called a non-rated vest. This is a very good illustration that some of these are still out in our communities. This vest is an illegal vest to have on this roadway. So notice that on the side of the employee, how there's no retroreflective material there. The retroreflective material that is on the vest is very minimal, not providing adequate communication to the approaching traveling traffic. Some folks will call out the sign that's in the employee's hand. They'll say, well, the sign has just a handle, the stop and slow paddle. It's not on a post. That you will see this potentially at times, especially if somebody's a supervisor and they've got just a quick set for emergency situations to put behind a truck seat. If you're going to use something like this, you have to keep in mind that you have got to keep that paddle up in the air the entire time. It has to be high enough and large enough to be visible to your approaching traffic. One other thing that is a concern with this picture for me is that when we would go back through and we would review some of the guidance through OSHA and even some that was listed in the prior MUTCD, we know that if we're going to be working on a multi-lane roadway, that we need to be using devices to control that roadway. So where's this employee's barrels, cones, barricades, shadow truck, arrow board? Where are all these other devices that should be being used to control this roadway, and not the frailty of just human life standing out there? And then at that, he's got his back to traffic, his head's against looking away from traffic, and not actually controlling that roadway. How about this location? Do you guys think this is proper? I mean, he got a lot of good stuff going on, doesn't he? He's got a safety, he's got his hard hat on, he's got safety glasses on, so if something happens, he's not going to lose his vision. He can see very well. He's got a stop and slow paddle. It's the 18-inch. It's on a plastic handled pole, so it's up high where it can be seen. He's wearing a class 3 ANSI vest. Man, that's his good stuff, right? He's got a lot of good things going on. But now look at the position and look at what we're dealing with the roadway. The employee is standing next to a vehicle. Remember what we said. You have to be standing alone, separate, away from all other vehicles, on the edge of the roadway, not in the roadway. And now look at the type of roadway that he's working in. He's working on a multi-lane roadway. And just like I shared a moment ago, if we're working on that multi-lane roadway, we should be using devices. Now I look for his devices, and where do I see them? I see him sitting there on the back of his truck. So why are they on the back of the truck and not out on the road properly controlling the traffic? So a lot of times we have the things that we need. We just have to make sure that we're using them. How about a situation here? Here's another one. So this one kind of for me, some of the things that I pick out on this is more kind of like when we have our moving and mobile operations. And many times we'll identify a roadway for moving and mobile ops. We'll have a starting point, let's say point A, to our ending point, point B. Understand that if you're doing mobile operations, that your point A to point B is not the placement of your flaggers point A to point B. Your flaggers still need to be outside of that, and your signs need to still be outside of where the flagger stations are going to start and end as well. So you have a situation with this flagger here. She makes her way up the roadway. Now her in this moving and mobile operation, her truck is pulled all the way up against that flagging ahead sign. She should still be another, depending on the speed of that roadway, another 350 feet to 500 feet away from that sign. But now she's crowded all the way up against it, and that's a problem. Additional things that we see wrong with it are standing out in the roadway, standing next to the truck, not being on the shoulder of the roadway, not facing the approaching travel. Maybe that's a day with not a lot of traffic, and so it's easy for the mind to wander. And you turn around and you're watching the work that's going on, but now you've got an approaching vehicle that might have surprised you. So we have to make sure that we see these things, that these are wrong, they're unsafe, and they're potential violations. How about another situation for you here? Like we said, a lot of times we find ourselves in situations where we've got to work on the edge of roadways and we're just trying to do the best that we can do. I look at the location for this gentleman that's working for the road crew. Look at the dynamic of this roadway, the geometrics of it. You got hills, you got the curves, you got the dips, you got heavy overhanging canopy. I'm sure there's probably the chances for the blinding sun as you come out of the canopy. But look at what he did do that was right. Even though he couldn't get the truck completely off the road, he got over as far as he safely thought that he could. And now, because we're dealing with hills and those dips and those curves, he chose a place to stop where he was going to be at the top or near the top of the crown of the hill, so that the approaching vehicles would have the best opportunity to be able to see him and see his device as he's approaching. Those are great things. ANSI Class 2 vest, great thing. Stop and slow paddle, fiberglass handle, right, or plastic handle. But now let's look at what's wrong. Because in this, despite of us trying to do all these other things that are right, it's only going to take one thing that we do wrong to put us in violation and potentially at risk. The employee sitting on the back of the tailgate, reading a book, not paying attention to approaching traffic, not manning the actual stop and slow paddle, just having it sitting out there in the middle of the roadway. These are things that are potentially very, very unsafe. And how
Time
about this one
check.
here? Thank you, Kara. How about
You're
this picture
welcome.
here? As we look at this flagger, this one here, this one kind of speaks to me and it kind of raises my feelers up in a lot of ways. Because when I look at this employee out here working, yes, the employee is exhausted and probably fallen asleep on the job. But the problem here is not the employer. Look at what the employer's done. If there was such thing as an anti-class 10, this fellow would probably be anti-class 10. I mean, look at the amount of high-vis material that he's wearing, his pants and his coat. He's got a hard hat on. He's got a very nice stop and slow paddle, fiberglass handle, the 24-inch paddle. It looks like it's even got a light attached to it. I see a retroreflective class 3 barricade in the background. He's got an illuminated light standard at his location. He's on the edge of the roadway just barely, but now he's exhausted. Why? What's the problem with this picture then? The problem is everybody else. Because nobody wants to flag, somebody gets stuck flagging and then they never get a break. Here's what I want to tell you. Remember your flaggers when you're out there. If your flaggers are on the roadway and it is excessively hot outside, remember to give them a break. Let them cool down and get hydrated. If they're on the roadway and it's incredibly cold outside, there's going to be a time where you should be going and having somebody give them a break so that they can get in a vehicle, they can warm up before they go back and take their location. And just like this poor soul here, at nighttime, is going to get so exhausted and so tired that he is no longer effective doing his job. And if I'm relying on him for my safety, is he keeping me safe? Is he keeping us safe? Is he keeping the approaching cars safe? No, probably not. So we've got to make sure that we're taking care of our flaggers as well. Give them the breaks that they need so that we can all work together to be absolutely as safe as possible. Remember to follow the standards for uniform flagging procedures like we talked about. Doing these things is going to increase the safety, it's going to keep us legal, and it's going to increase that road user's respect. Well, I know it's a long time for us to all stay together and sitting still. Why don't we take a pause? We'll take a 10-minute break, give you the opportunity to get up, go do anything that you need to do, get some coffee, check your email, and we'll meet back here in approximately 10 minutes. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you were able to enjoy that quick break. We're going to jump back into to our webinar for our safe flagger operations. Now, we just went through a bunch of slides and seen a bunch of examples of things that are not to do, and we talked about why not. And I'm sure many of you may have said, I've done that before. Well, that's okay, right? We've done it in the past. We've got an opportunity to learn. We've got an opportunity to correct things. Now, when it comes to proper flagger training, currently, flaggers we know that they have to be properly trained in safe traffic control practices. Now, currently, Ohio does not require flagger certification or flagger registration. However, there are some private companies that do, and there are also opportunities out there if you would still like to seek that out. Some available training sites would be ATSA, the Ohio Laborers Training, as well as the OSHA Education Center. So we definitely have opportunities out there if you would like to try to search out additional training on these topics and registrations and certifications. Now let's talk about motorists that are in our work zones. We know there's lots of things that we're dealing with out on our roadways when we're trying to conduct our inspection and maintenance operations. Many times, the drivers that are coming through the work areas, they're very tired, they're distracted, they're rushed, they might be angry. The flagger must get their attention to guide them through the work zone safely and to be able to protect the fellow workers. But we know that controlling drivers is very difficult at times. Drivers want to make their own decisions. They want to be in control. They have their own expectations. They left the house. They've got a point A. They've got a point B and a time frame to get there. And we know that within work zones are going to be more prone to those crashes. And they many times think that flaggers are just in the way. But all along, the flaggers are trying to control that roadway and provide that safe communication for all road users. We also know that there's other factors that affect the road users' abilities while they're out driving. You think about weather and environmental concerns that we all face. You might be driving in the rain, it might be very dense fog, driving in snow and sleet and ice. Hopefully, we're not out there having to flag traffic in a snow and ice event, but there is the potential for things to happen at times. So, weather and environmental concerns are absolutely something to take into consideration with the work areas and the approaching drivers. Even in the fall time, you've got the leaf falling. Leaf debris gets built up on the roadway. The leaf debris can get very wet, and that can get very slick and be able to, stop the ability of a vehicle or prevent the ability for a vehicle to stop very, very quickly in the event that they needed to. You have drivers' experiences or lack thereof. Talking about our youth, kind of a funny joke. When I was growing up, my dad had a sign that he hung in the garage and it said, hire a teenager while they still know everything. And, but that's kind of the truth, right? Our young drivers, they think they know it all. They can handle this. And they get out there and they go after it pretty hard. And that could be a concern for work zones. You also have driver's age. Many times with some of the senior drivers, and I'm fast approaching that can be a problem. Eyesight, reaction time, and those things start to diminish. You've also have operator vulnerabilities. There's lots of vulnerabilities that are out there on the roadways, maybe concessions made to vehicles so that they can still be able to have that freedom and that ability to be able to be out. But these are all things that you have to remember that everybody's dealing with things. We always know that alcohol has always been a troublesome spot to be mindful of. You got alcohol consumption, people that are intoxicated. You have drugs, especially now that you have a lot more marijuana use, legal use on the roadways. There's many times that you're driving down the roadway and you can even smell it from the vehicles around you. You got to be mindful of that and be very safe. So there's intoxication, there's impairment. We also know that distracted driving is still a big problem. This is being tracked. There's different programs that are out there that are trying to minimize it and educate it to try to prevent this from happening. But let's face it, folks, distracted driving comes in a lot of other fashions than just somebody holding a mobile device. You could be distracted with the device that is already inside the vehicle and how some of the new vehicles are made. Lots of them are made like a big computer screen now. You could be distracted because the driver could be distracted because their mind is going through something. Maybe they're off somewhere thinking about a hardship that they might be facing in their family currently. They're thinking about the problematic things of their day, and their mind is someplace else other than focusing on their driving. There's lots of different ways to be distracted. But for the flagger controlling the roadway, you have to have an understanding that these are all the different types of things that you might be facing. So we're going to talk about that's why it's important to have those safe locations for your flagging station. And also, we're going to talk later about having a flagging escape route so that in the event that there is an errant vehicle that has an issue, that you have the ability to get free of that roadway to keep yourself safe. When you're out there flagging, never assume that another driver sees you. Now, you're still trying to make eye contact. You're doing everything that you're supposed to do by the standard to communicate, but never assume that they see you. You have to be ready to respond to protect yourself. Now, here's another thing that we've learned. I was teaching a class at one of our local public agencies. We were teaching on this particular topic, and one of the road members spoke up. He said, Browning, I had a situation. And I said, what's that? Tell me what your story is. And he said, I was out flagging on a 2-lane roadway. We had everything set up absolutely perfect. We had our signs out. The work zone was set up. The work was in process. He said, I had a car that was fast approaching me, and I had my stop paddle out, and I'm standing on the edge of the roadway telling them to stop. I've got my free hand up in the air like I'm supposed to, trying to get their attention, but the car was not responding. Now, many of us that have worked for a long time on the road, we can read a car and have that kind of that preemptive thought about what the car is doing. If you see a car approaching you and the front end is rising, you know they're accelerating. If the car is coming at you and you see the front end begin to drop, you know they're starting to brake. If that car is coming at you and you're trying to get their attention and nothing is changing, there's a good chance that they don't see you or they're distracted in some sort. Well, that's what happened to this flagger. And he said as the car approached, it was coming at him very quickly, and then all of a sudden it came to a stop very abruptly. And he was in the process of getting ready to run away further from the roadway for a flagging escape route and thinking about how he was going to warn the workers in that actual work area. It was when the car approached and come to a screeching halt that the flagger saw something that he didn't realize what it was at first. And then the driver of the automobile said to him, I didn't think my car was going to stop. It had scared that driver as well. And then it was at that point that the flagger realized what he saw. The driver of the vehicle, which was driving a Tesla, was driving in fully autonomous mode, and he had a magazine in full view where he wasn't even looking at the roadway. Now, we know that there's a lot of these vehicles on the roadway. We know that if you have them, you are supposed to be still paying attention. You are supposed to be ready to take control of that vehicle at any moment should you need to, and not be driving like it's allowing the car to just do everything completely. But this is something that I feel needs to be discussed and needs to be shared, especially when we're talking about our 2-lane roadways and we're talking about our rural lane roadways, that flaggers need to be aware of this, that not only do we have these other factors that are affecting road users' abilities, especially like talking about the distracted driving, the alcohol, the drugs and things, but also be mindful that now you have to think about the potential effects of autonomous vehicles. And not to blame or say anything bad about any of these, because this is a wonderful technology that has a lot of room for improvement, and it has improved very much, especially since it very began. Here's just some real quick rundown. You have Tesla vehicles. Ford is advertising their Blue Cruise. GM is advertising Super Cruise. And yes, there are still yet others. Many of you probably saw a lot of the funny videos that come out of, I believe it was a community in Los Angeles. There's a company called Waymo who created the robo taxi, 100% robotic autonomous taxis. And the way they communicate with one another is to blow their horns, and then the taxis hear the horn and they know where each other's at. And there was people in the community that were so upset being kept awake all night long because the horns were constantly blowing. So this type of technology is increasing. It's getting better, and it's going to be more and more on the roadway. My point of sharing it with you is just to be aware of it as flaggers, so that when you have those approaching vehicles, you may have somebody that is absolutely trusting this car, not paying attention to the roadway at all. I remember reading about safety articles when this technology first started happening, and there were many crashes that happened for people that were trusting the vehicle to run in full autonomous mode. Many times there was crashes where these vehicles wrecked directly into fire engines and emergency medical personnel or police officers, because the computer at that time was not able to see the safety equipment on that roadway. So you think about a fire apparatus responding to an intersection crash, and they pull directly across that intersection to protect the crash and the injured until they can clear it to open the roadway back up. And there were several crashes that happened where an autonomous vehicle was actually crashing directly into it because it did not reference that fire apparatus. So if there's a chance that something could fail, there's a chance that a computer could not see something as large as a fire apparatus. Do you think that there could be the potential possibility that it doesn't reference you and the frailty of human life standing there with just a stop and slow paddle? My point's not to scare you. My point is to educate you and to be mindful that these are things on our roadways that we have to be aware of. So we're talking about our flagger operations continued. We know we can go to our MUTCD. We can see Chapter 6D for flagger operations. And also, as we would look at the OSHA standard, 29 CFR 1926 tells us that when operations are such that signs and signals and barricades do not provide the necessary protection on or adjacent to a highway or street, that flaggers or other appropriate traffic controls shall be provided, and signaling directions by flaggers shall, not should, shall conform to the MUTCD. This kind of goes back to those pictures where we discussed the flaggers that were standing on multi-lane roadways. They were on a multi-lane roadway that could be controlled by a sign, by a signal, by a barricade, by some type of device, not necessarily just themselves. Now, when we get to two-lane roadways, now we know that that's not enough. Now we have to have flaggers. So this is where we draw that conclusion at with the OSHA standard 29 CFR. We need to know our ABCs of proper flagging. A for advance warning, B for be visible and be alert, and then also C for control. And these are the essential aspects of any flagging operation. And just as a reminder, as we talked about before when we looked at the actual stop and slow paddles, flaggers have the same ability to control traffic as signs and signals do, and they have to be obeyed. So you have a regulatory stop sign. If you're doing everything that's safe to control that roadway and you're having problems with motorists that are not obeying your controls, I always encourage everyone to reach out to their local police department, reach out to the local sheriff's deputy and see if they can put somebody near the work zone just in an effort to help you control it to keep you safe. All right, let's talk about the typical components of a temporary traffic control work zone. Now, these areas are going to be the same areas, whether we're dealing with multi-lane or we're dealing with two-lane. We're going to have an advanced warning area, and then we're going to have a transition area. We'll have our work area, which is going to include the buffer space and the workspace. The traffic space is going to be that intended area that we want traffic to be able to pass the work area. And then at the end of your work zone, you're going to have the termination area to follow up. So here we see it kind of drawn out on a roadway here for a two-lane fashion since we're discussing flagger operations. We see our advanced warning area, and this is what we're going to discuss first. This is going to be the placement of advanced warning area signs. So with this advanced warning, we know it's very important for us to make sure that we have them out there. This lets the public know that you're there, that they're going to be approaching a work area. And the signs need to be installed before you start your flagging operations. So we go out, we decide where the signs have to be. We set the signs up appropriately with the appropriate spacing to the speed of that roadway. And we get our signs set up and then we begin the flagging operation. And as a reminder, everything at nighttime has to be retroreflective. So retroreflective for nighttime operations. Examples of your temporary traffic control signage could include, so our very first sign is going to be to get the driver's attention, to let them know up front that they're getting ready to approach something. You might have a workers ahead sign. Your sign might say utility work ahead. It might say road work ahead. There's many approved variations of this first initial sign. So whatever it is that you have, this is going to be the sign that goes out first to get the driver's attention. The next sign that you're going to put out is now going to tell them what the problem is, and then we're going to tell them what we want them to do. So our next sign out could be a variation of a lane closed ahead, that the lane closed ahead, there's one lane road ahead. There's a couple of different signs that your communities may have, but this is the second sign that's going out. We're telling them what that problem is. And your third sign is going to be your flagger ahead sign. Sometimes the flagger ahead sign could be a text sign that actually is red, flagger ahead. Many times our communities are now moving over to symbol signs just because a symbol is easier to be understood, especially if someone struggles with the ability to read an English language. So having a symbol sign is very effective. But we're telling them that they're approaching a work zone. We're telling them what the problem is, and now we're telling them what we want them to do, and that's going to be obey the flagger. There's a fourth sign that you can also use in your deployment of advanced signage, and that's going to be the be prepared to stop sign. If you're on high speed roadways, You could place this sign 1,000 foot before that flagging station. When you look at typical applications, it's going to be listed as optional. But just because something is listed as optional doesn't mean we don't do it. It's still highly advisable that we do it. If you're working on roadways that have high levels of traffic, very busy, high speeds, you've got curves and dips, and you've got hills and things that you're dealing with, putting a sign out that says be prepared to stop advances the level of safety to the degree that letting the motorists know that they're going to be brought to a stop or a queued line of traffic in an area that may never have queued traffic, in an area that they may never even think about stopping. So adding this fourth sign is a very safe addition to your sign deployment. Something that we can do to help our signs be able to be more visible so that they are communicating even more effectively is placing a reflective cone next to each of the temporary traffic control signs as that improved communication. Many times there's flags that are made that can go on the top of your signs. If you have the flags, putting that on there is advanced communication. It's not anything necessarily that all the signs will have, but if you have the ability to do this, we know that there's a problem. And one of the problems is that when we have roadway signs, our signs on the roadway are competing for the attention of the motorist with everything else that's out there. All the other existing signs that are on the side of the roadway, rather they're regulatory or they're guide signs, signs that are giving directions. It could even be the for sale sign or a garage sale sign or a beautiful scenery like the picture on the screen now, looking out and seeing, let's say, Lake Erie, that our signs are going to be competing for that driver's attention. So something as simple as putting flags on the signs, and if you don't have flags, you can actually put the retroreflective cones next to your signs, all in an effort to be able to have better communication. Our advanced warning sign spacing when we're putting our signs out is prescribed by the MUTCD. When we're looking at low speed roads, 40 mile an hour or less, we're going to see a range it's going to run from 100 to 350 feet apart. When we start getting to higher speed roadways, we start getting into our rural roadways. Now we're getting up to 500 foot or more, especially when you start looking at multi-lane and you start looking at freeways and expressways. The distances become very far. And these distances are prescribed all in an effort to give the motorist the attention so that they have the time to see the sign and then to be able to respond to it. So they see that they're approaching a work area, they see what the problem is, and now they're reading the sign that tells them what they have to do. Like in this situation, that there is a flagger ahead. So make sure that you reference the guide, and we'll show you that here just in a moment. And this is some of the different types of changes that you can potentially make to a work zone. Now, let's say I'm in a low speed area and my chart tells me that I only need my signs to be 100 foot apart. But I know for a fact that everybody on this roadway is running in excess of the speed limit. Maybe posted regulatory speed is 35 mile an hour, and you're pretty accustomed that everybody's going to be running 45. You can opt to take the larger spacing if you have the ability to do that, making that adaptation to your deployment. Here's that typical application TA10 that we were talking about previously, and we can see how it's giving us the basic guidance for the things that we can lay out. We're going to see the signs that are going to be required, the road work ahead or workers ahead, the one lane road that's going to be ahead or the lane closed ahead. Primarily, you're going to want to use a one lane road ahead sign, and then you see that flagger sign. Notice that in between all three of those signs, you're going to see a distance of A, B, and C. And so that's going to offset from where the flagging position is at. That A, B, and C is what's going to be referenced to the distances of signs that we talked about in the previous slide. In our next slide, I'm going to actually show you the table. As a reminder too, your typical applications are a starting point for your work zone deployment. The drawing of TA10 shows the roadway to be curved, but again, maybe my roadway is not curved. Maybe my roadway is actually a hill. Well, I see the deployment of the flagging station that flagger going northbound needs to be before the crest of the hill starts to drop over. I need to be on that lower side so that I'm in a position that will be best visible by approaching traffic. Maybe my roadway is just a straight roadway. The typical application is still going to work. It's meant to be that starting point and to give you that guidance. And then remember, with these typical application drawings, you're going to have several things to be able to read. It's going to go through standard and guidance and options and support information. Here's the table that has been recommended. It is updated here out of our new supplemental and the new 2023 MUTCD. Notice that it shows the road type. We have urban, low speed, urban, high speed, and then we have rural roadways, and we have freeways and expressways. Over across the chart, you're going to see the distance between signs, distance A, B, and C. That A, B, and C is corresponding with that drawing where I showed you A, B, and C. Now, if I'm on low speed, that's going to be 40 mile an hour or less. I can opt to do the 100-foot spacing. Then you have the urban high speed. That's going to be above the 40 mile an hour. So let's say 45 and up. And then we get to rural roadways. We're going to be 500 foot across the board. Freeways and expressways are going to give you what the spacing sign for the signs is there as well. All right, we were doing our ABCs, and now we're going to move on to B, being visible and being alert. We need to make sure that all the road users see you. So we talked about the proper PPE. We talked about the things building our toolbox. What are the things we can do? These are things that are going to be very important for you to have and make sure that you are abiding by the regulations with it. Having proper clothing, having proper signage, having proper PPE. Remember, like we shared previously, that there are about 20 flaggers that are killed each year. Many times speed comes into play with that. We'll also talk about how sometimes it could even be the type of roadway that we're driving on. But it's very imperative that we take this seriously and we are doing everything appropriate. Just like we talked about with the TA10 looking like a curve, maybe pretending that it's an actual hill, always think about the placement of your flaggers. Where's the flagger going to be at? If it's a stationary job, you pick out those most safest locations for your flagger location to be set up at. When you're dealing with hills and curves, you always need to be in advance of the hill, be in advance of that curve. If you're in a moving and mobile operation that you're flagging, there may be times where that tangent area is going to get very, very long for the flagger until the approaching driver actually gets up to where maybe the work area is as the work area is moving up the roadway, because the flagger is still going to need to abide by that. You wouldn't want the flagger, notice the very first little drawing says okay, notice that the second one says no. If we were in a moving and mobile operation, I don't want to move ahead and put myself in the position of no. I still need to maintain adequate distance and stay back where it's going to be okay. Remember, our stopping distances can vary greatly upon the conditions of the roadway that we're in addition to eye lead time and the reaction time and effective braking of an approaching vehicle. Many vehicles from 2 wheels up to 18 wheels are going to have different stopping distances. So it's very important that we're setting up ourselves in a position that they can see us, before they approach us. Think about the conditions of the roadway. If you're out working on a township roadway that maybe just got freshly tarred, got chip sealed or something like that, tar and chip, that aggregate that's loose on the pavement surface is going to cause them to need more stopping room, more notification room, if we're as compared to maybe working on something that's a fresh mat. So there's lots of things that kind of play into that. And then when you start adding the environmental side, is it ice? Is it sleet? Is there packed snow? Is the pavement just wet? There's lots of things that come into play with that. So when you're deploying out your plan for what your work zone is going to be, take these things into consideration for additional safety. We talked about our PPE, and this is just a real quick reminder again. This is part of being visible. Make sure that you're wearing the proper PPE, the proper ANSI garments for that roadway. If you have further questions or you'd like to learn more about that, reach out to me in email and I'll try to answer your questions for you. But again, as a reminder and a review, ANSI Class 2 is going to be daytime operations only from about 25 to 50 mile an hour. Anything over 50 is automatically going to be class 3. And if we're working at nighttime, we're going to be in a class 3. We also discussed how we could upgrade a class 2 article to become class 3, and that was by utilizing any approved class E garment. We talked about highway pants, we talked about high vis rain gear, we talked about the gaiters. There's things that are out there that are available. Make sure that you're operating compliant. C for control. So we have to remember that the flagger is considered a legal traffic control device and they have to be obeyed. And with that, flaggers, conduct yourself accordingly. Be professional, be responsible, be attentive, and be alert when you're on that roadway. You're not only referencing that local public agency that you work for. So you need to be very professional in that, but also for the respect of that road user so that they will take you seriously and they will pay attention even further. So conduct yourself accordingly, realizing of the seriousness of this. So we talk about control by cone taper placements. We know that when it comes to tapers, if we're working on multi-lane roadways, the tapers can get very, very, very long, depending on the speed of the roadway, depending on the width of the lane that the traveling public is in. Your taper distances can get increasingly long, and there's an entire table that's built around that I showed you at the very beginning that you get downloaded when you download the actual work zone app to your phone. But when we're talking about flagging, we are not going to use that table for flagging. We need to have shorter tapers because the shorter tapers are going to discourage drivers from moving into that open lane. Think about it for yourself. When you've been driving down the roadway and you're approaching a work zone, and maybe it's a multi-lane roadway, and that taper just kind of meanders on and on and on. It's very, very long. It almost just kind of gives you that initiative to just go ahead and take the merge. We don't want drivers to feel that when they're coming up to a flagging location. We want to do our best to try to get them to slow down, come to a stop, preventing the head-on collisions if possible. So shorter tapers with our cones closer together are going to be more effective. What we want with a taper set up for flagging operations is a minimum of 50 feet to a maximum of 100 foot. And the spacing between your cones is going to be 20-foot maximum spacing. So you're talking about a very short, very abrupt taper to get the control of the traffic that is approaching. Now, you and I that might be in the work zone, we can tell that the distance of the taper is 50 to 100 foot long. But to that approaching vehicle that might be a quarter mile away, maybe a half mile away, it's going to look like cones are just straight across the road, like the lane is just completely cut off. And then they're going to see the advanced warning signs. It's going to encourage them to have to come to slow down to decide what the next maneuver is going to be and how they need to go around it and why it's in the roadway. It's going to be at that point that now that they've read what the signs are warning them and giving them the directions what they need to do, that they now see the flagger in advance of that taper, and the flagger is giving them the ultimate guidance in what they're doing next. Are they stopping, or are they going to be allowed to proceed slowly? So shorter tapers are going to encourage your drivers to slow down. Here's an example on your screen of a drawing. So examples of flagging on a lane closure. So we have approaching traffic coming up the roadway. We see the taper, very short, 50 to 100 foot. Notice the location of my flagger indicated by the stop sign that's there, the stop panel, and the flagger being positioned at the beginning of taper away from the work area and all other vehicles. Now, in addition to that, the space that's just past that taper that's open is going to be our buffer space. It's going to be very important to incorporate buffer spaces into all of your work zones. For it to be an appropriate buffer space, it's got to be free of all other things. There's no parked vehicles in it. We're not storing equipment. We're not storing supplies. We don't have a debris pile and spoils pile that's sitting in it. This is going to be a completely open area of pavement. In the event that an approaching vehicle was distracted maybe and they did not see your three advanced warning signs, now they are approaching that very blunt taper and the flagger is there. And let's say they accidentally careen through your taper. This buffer space is going to give them an open area for them to regain control and come to a complete stop before they hit somebody in the work area, which is indicated by the orange block with the X in it. But what's one of the problems that we'll find happening? So kind of put ourselves through this whole thing that we're talking about right here. You see the purple truck that's approaching. We see the flagger. We see our very short taper, the 50 to 100 foot, our buffer space, our work area. This is what we're looking for. The problem and some of the times the mistakes that we're making is that we end up doing something that's a little bit more like this. We just start out, we might put our signs out and our signs are spaced perfectly and legal. We start to set out, the flagger may have rode with the road crew and the crew cab truck out to the spot. You stop in the lane of traffic to begin doing your working. If you might throw a couple cones out behind you, the flagger's setting up really close to the work area in the trucks, and this is a violation. So now this purple truck driving up the roadway that may have been distracted, that missed the advanced warning signs, now they have to come to a complete abrupt stop immediately. They're not going to stop fast enough to not end up into that actual work area, striking the work vehicles, striking the people that are working on foot. Remember the article that I showed you, the diagram that showed how many of the fatalities and serious injuries were happening in the work area? This is why the buffer space is so important, because it's going to give that time for a vehicle to be able to recover and to keep you and them safe. Three basic skills for flagging our road users. So as we would look into the manual would identify these, that we have to do it. And remember what we said, that if we're going to be using flaggers, the flaggers control shall, not should, but shall be corresponding with the MUTCD. Those controls are going to be stopping, releasing, and slowing our road users. So as we would look through the manual, we'll see some diagrams that have it actually drawn out, showing you what is required. There is some updates to that. So let's move on to what we have here to show you update. So we know that we're going to stand on the shoulder of the roadway. We've said that repeatedly already. We're not going to be flagging from standing out in that actual lane of traffic. Now that you have if you have your taper that's out, you have your flagger standing on the edge of the roadway, the flagger is to be alert and to be facing the traffic at all times to have that proper communication and control. Notice my flagger in the picture. She's standing on the edge of that roadway away from the vehicular traffic. She has her stop and slow paddle. She has stop displayed, right? It's attached to a post that has it high enough to be visible to the approaching traffic. So, and she also has her palm out. So the manual would also say that with your free hand and your hands up and your palm out, indicating to the traffic, communicating to them that they need to stop. Remember, we never stand in front of oncoming and moving traffic. Now that you have traffic that has approached you and now they have stopped where you want them to stop at, and let's say now you have a line of traffic that is queued. Now, if the flagger would decide to step out into the roadway just to be able to go out so that the approaching traffic could still see that stop paddle much easier, then the flagger, if they choose to, could now step out into that lane, but they don't have to. The safest place is still always going to be on the shoulder of that roadway. So now you're out there, you got your traffic stopped, your stop paddle is out, your palm is facing stop. Now you get the call that it's time to release your traffic. When it comes time to release the traffic, you don't just turn the paddle and go walking back to the shoulder of the roadway, because chances are you may end up with a vehicle that is ready to hit the throttle and fly on through that work zone, and you're not completely out of the roadway. Remember, you're never in the road around moving traffic. It's only after that traffic is stopped and you have multiple vehicles that are queued up in line. So now we're going to move forward and we're going to look at releasing our traffic. So as we would release our traffic, we're going to remain on the shoulder of that roadway, away from moving vehicular traffic to take away that risk, right? The flagger, she turns her paddle over to the slow side, and now she's taking her free hand and she's making a waving motion, waving them on. So display slow facing to the traffic, use that free hand to direct the drivers that they can continue on through the work area. And the manual would say, do not wave the sign at drivers. Now we've all heard the funny stories where a flagger got really upset and decided to take their flag panel and start waving it like a baseball bat and doing things like that. Remember the conversation that we just had where we said be professional? You have to be professional. Don't wave your sign at the drivers. We know that there's going to be a time that traffic is going to be approaching somewhat quickly, and we don't want the traffic driving around that work area going too fast. So we're going to want to slow them down. It may not necessarily we have to stop them, but we want to slow them down. So as that traffic is beginning to approach you, and you've got your slow paddle facing them for communication, the manual would now say take your free hand and move it up and down in an up and down motion to be able to communicate to the driver that they need to slow down. And remember, never stand in the path of oncoming traffic at all. Don't put yourself in that risk. Don't put yourself in a place where you become a target. Stay on the edge of that roadway that's going to be able to control that traffic. Now, many of you that are listening in on the webinar today, you're probably already in the process of many flagging operations in the past. And you're thinking to yourself, well, Gary, there's been lots of times that I was flagging and I had cars coming through that were moving way too quickly. I had my slow paddle and I did exactly that, and they still wouldn't slow down and they ripped through the work zone at a dangerous amount of speed. What do we do? The times that I've had those types of things of experience and I've sat through other flagging classes, this is something that I picked up long ago. Remember, we don't want cars driving through at a full rate or excelled rate of speed, just especially because what if something happens that a car loses control and they have a roadside departure right in the middle of that work area? What if somebody accidentally steps out past the double yellow line, like the story I shared in the beginning, and now you have a worker to get struck? We want to slow them down. If you have vehicles that are not going to abide by that, many times the best and safest operation, if they're not responding to your slow communication, is just to take it back to a stopped point again. But if you're going to go back to a stop point with the intent of releasing them again, you have to make sure that you're communicating properly with your opposite flagger. So let's say we're using a two-way radio for communication. Grabbing my two-way radio, I call my opposite flagger on the radio, and I say, I have a really fast approaching vehicle. I'm going to turn my flag back to stop. Don't release your traffic. Keep your traffic stopped as well. The other flagger confirms that they understand the communication. They say, okay, go ahead and do that. I'll keep my traffic stopped. You go ahead and turn your paddle from slow back to stop. You go through the processes that we previously discussed to bring that traffic to a stop. And now that it's safe to release them, now you can go back to turning your paddle to slow and with your free hand telling them to proceed. It's all in an effort just to try to slow that traffic down. So we're trying to minimize potential injuries, crashes, the serious injuries, and the fatalities in our work areas. Like we said just a minute ago, don't be a target. Always make sure you're flagging, your operations are going to be from the edge of roadway and away from all other vehicles. And lots of times this might still happen because we have somebody that's untrained and unlearned, and they're going to be the flagger that it gets, maybe assigned to do this. We know we've already discussed that that's wrong, but maybe very quickly you just talk to them. You say, do this, do this, do this, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. You look at them, do you understand? They nod their head at you like, yeah, I think I understand. And you're like, okay, go flag. That is not going to be adequate training. You need to be able to give them the proper training because even though they said, yes, I understand, what this person's doing in the picture may be exactly what they thought they heard, even though it's not what you told them to do. So make sure you're providing adequate training. Utilize the Ohio LTAP Center. Invite me out to be your safety circuit rider. Come attend our full day work zone classes, but make sure your folks are trained in safe operations for temporary traffic control. All right, we know there's different types of flagging operations that we can get into. It's kind of like a Dr. Seuss book if you think about it. One flag or two flag or three flag or more. There's lots of flagging operations because our variations of work are ever changing. So let's go through and just look at a few of these. We know that two flagger operations is going to be the primary, the majority of the type of flagging operations that we have. It's the most common form. There's no AFAD that's involved. That's that picture I showed you of the automatic flagging assistance device. We know that communication is absolutely essential, and usually one flagger should primarily be in charge, especially if you're on a roadway that has very low traffic. Maybe you have an occasional car that's going to come through that day. Usually that flagger that's going to be in the same side of the roadway that the work area is in is going to be the one primarily in charge, holding the stop paddle, while the other lane that is unencumbered is going to remain in a slow fashion so that it can, traffic can proceed. But then even after that, as traffic is passing, as they're coming and going, those flaggers need to be in constant communication so that they're reading one from another when it's time to stop, when it's time to slow to keep everybody safe. We know that with communication with flaggers, there's many different ways of doing communication, and a lot of these areas are identified in your MUTCD. You have the sight method, and we're going to talk about each one of these. You have the sight method, you have the use of two-way radios, and then you have a couple of the things that are probably least likely to happen, at least in the state of Ohio, but you have a flag carry method as well as pilot car method. Now, the pilot car, we won't really get in that today. That's something that you typically see when you're much further west where you have a work zone, you have a line of cars that are stopped and queued, and you have a vehicle that is identified as that pilot, that they get in front of the line of cars and they may drive them. The other cars will follow that pilot car and lead them through a work zone that may be miles and miles and miles long. That pilot car gets to the other end, they dip off the roadway, traffic proceeds on, they pull in front of the other vehicles that are waiting, and then they repeat that process. That's that pilot car mode. We typically don't see that here, but it's not to say that you may not ever. So let's talk about sight method. Sight method is one of the ways that we flag quite frequently. And if we're going to do the sight method alone, you have to understand a few things. Both flaggers must have uninterrupted sight view of each other at all times. You must be able to make visual contact at all times while you're out working on that roadway. Now, if you look at my picture and my flaggers here, they're somewhat close enough together that the sight method would work for them. But if they begin to pull other equipment in and out of that operation, that work area, the backhoe begins to swing its boom over and it's re-maneuvering something that now the flaggers can't see each other without a flagger entering into that traveled lane to be able to see what the other flagger is doing. That is no longer going to be a sight method approved area. It has to be uninterrupted sight view of each other at all times. So if we can't see each other at all times, or maybe at all, now we're going to get into some other type of communication, which is primarily a two-way radio method. This is going to be the most common type. Many of our local public agencies, we buy these. Many agencies will even assign a radio to every single employee, or they'll just have maybe a small bank of them in a garage to be able to use. Radio communication is very effective for flaggers, and you have to have something like this when the flaggers cannot see each other. And if you have multiple flaggers, which we'll talk about that just in a moment, every one of the flaggers that are out on the job site should all have to have their radios with them. Now, here's a problem that comes with batteries, and it's like anything else that takes a battery. Batteries go dead, and lots of times the batteries will sit on a charger for so long that the charger will begin to burn the cells. And so that morning, you're planning on going out to do some flagging operations. You look down at the charger, you grab your battery, the light was green, saying it was fully charged. Only you get out to the work zone, and maybe you're only 20 minutes into your day, and you go to key the mic, and it beeps at you that the battery's dead and it'll no longer work. That's a huge problem. So we encourage everybody that if you're going to be utilizing radios for your flagging communication, carry extra batteries with you just in case the battery goes dead. Because what happens if you're relying on radio communication for safety, and for that overall communication between the flaggers, and now you don't have it. Now you have a very, very unsafe road, a very, very unsafe work zone that you're going to have to pull everybody off that road just to be able to go back to the shop to pick up the batteries that you should have already had with you. So plan ahead, be safe, and carry extra batteries with you. Now we said one of the least common was this flag carry method. And I actually had one person in one of my classes this year that said, "Hey, Gary, I was actually in a work zone and they did the flag carry method." And I can't recall where he was at. It might have been South Carolina. But he said he was actually the car, I believe, that got the flag. So here's what they do. In the flag carry method, this is going to be a place for maybe radio communications are inoperable, or maybe they don't have radios or any other form of that communication. You're going to have your cars are going to be stopped in queue. So that first flagger is going to hand a flag off to the last car that is allowed to pass through the work area. That driver then, as they go through the actual work zone, is going to stop at the next flagger and hand that flag off, signalizing an all clear signal so that the second flagger can then release their traffic and do the same thing. So imagine that just for a minute. You're flagging, and that's your form of communication, especially in today's environment that we're in. So you get to that last car, you give them some very brief instructions. Sir or madam, please give this flag to the opposite flagger at the other end of the work zone. And then you let them go and they drive on. What do you think could potentially go wrong with that? Maybe they keep the flag. Maybe they toss it out someplace else. Maybe they make a really funny social media post later to say, "I wonder how long they kept the traffic because here's their flag. I didn't hand it off." I mean, things can happen like that, right? So we know that's least common. We try to avoid this. But what happens if we absolutely have to have it? I remember being on flood response teams to Southern Ohio, and we were in areas where the hollers were so deep that our two-way radios didn't want to work because we were outside of the range of a repeater. And even today, some people say, "Well, we'll just use our cell phones." But how often do your cell phones not even have service? And you might be right in the middle of the city. Remember, if you're going to be on the roadway and you're going to be flagging, you have to be able to have proper communication. So be planning ahead to be safe and choose the right communication that's going to work for you. We also said that there are times for one flagger operations, but we know that there are a few conditions that must be met for single flagging operation. Remember the picture that I showed you previously that had the curve, and we said, "Where's the flagger at?" It looked like they were absent for duty, but then maybe they were standing up behind that white 2.5 ton truck in that curve. and we said that that was an illegal single flagger operation. Well, let me show you what legal is, because the things that you have to be aware of if you're going to do single flagger is it's got to be a low volume, low speed roadway. You need to have very good visibility, relatively a short workspace so that it's manageable by a single flagger. And then you're planning on only being there for a short duration. So here's what we want to do. We know that the flagger has to stand across from the workspace and control both directions of traffic. They're never going to enter that roadway. Now, what was different with the picture that I showed you that was real life? They were standing on a roadway that had a curve. There was lots of things that were wrong with that. And then that flagger was standing in the actual work area and not adjacent from it. So let's look at some real life pictures of what's the proper way to do single flagging. Note the location of the flagger and how they're away from traffic on the shoulder of that roadway. The flagger must be visible to traffic from both directions. That helps them have control. They can see the traffic that's coming from both sides, as well as the traffic that's coming through that they're able to see appropriately as well. The flagger is to never step into the lane of traffic. Now, if you remember when we were talking about two flagger operations and I've got stopped traffic, let's say I've got a stop of multiple cars that are queued up in line, that then if I want to step out a little bit further into the roadway so that approaching traffic can see my stop paddle a little bit easier, I can do that if I choose to. Well, here's the thing, when it comes to one flagger operations, you never step into the roadway because that lane is always going to be a live lane of traffic, regardless of what direction. Because if you're stopping one, the others are coming through. So single flagging is never in the roadway at any time. We also know that we said that then we can get into times where we have multiple flagging operations. Maybe we get a spot where we're going to need more than just two flaggers. Let's say like in the diagram that I kind of made here for you, my flaggers that are kind of circled, those are my primary flaggers, right, from each end of that work area. But maybe really close to your work area, it may be somewhat a busy area. Maybe you've got some side roads that are intersecting into it. Maybe you have a very busy business and that business is able to enter, their driveway is kind of right there where cars can come in and out, and it's to the degree that it's going to be a problem. These are the types of situations where I would encourage you to have additional flaggers so that we're controlling that traffic at each point that may enter into that roadway, and not necessarily just the two primary flaggers. But you better believe it, communication is a must. Each one of these flaggers are going to need to have some form of a radio so that they can talk, so that when it's time for us to send traffic eastbound, only eastbound traffic is going to move. If somebody's wanting to turn west when we're sending them east, you got to be able to stop them to prevent a head-on collision, especially when we're, talking about being right there around that work area. So communication is absolutely a must. When we're sending traffic east, everybody's east. When we're sending them west, everybody's west. More special situations that we can deal with, we talk about with advanced flagging. So sometimes we may have to actually stop each vehicle. Maybe you're out responding to some type of an emergent event, and there's a situation that's going to require you to give each car specific situations to advise them of what the situation is ahead. Be very cautious if you're ever in this situation, because remember, now that's putting you very dangerously close to the edge of that roadway and vehicular traffic. Always be alert and be considerate as you're giving the instructions and whatever it is that you have to share. Let it be very short. Avoid the unnecessary conversations. I know that might be hard in some of the smaller communities, especially if the people driving through may know you and may want to get into sidebar conversations, but you got to keep it moving. You got to keep yourself safe. Be alert, be considerate, avoid unnecessary conversations, and take care of what you're doing. We know that our circular intersections are becoming more prevalent throughout the state as well as throughout the country. And so let's take a look at it. We're talking about one flagger, two flaggers, three flaggers, and more, right? Here's an opportunity. Let's say you have a work that you have to go into. You got a single lane roundabout, and maybe there's some type of inspection or a maintenance operation or emergency that you're responding to. And now you're thinking, well, how are we going to control this circular intersection? How are we going to control this roundabout? You have several new typical applications that are available to be able to help you. This is one that was also provided to us in our previous. But take a look at what they've done here. You've got not only all the suggested signs, like we talked previously with TA10, the distances of A, B, and C, but now look at where your flaggers are located. We're turning the circular intersection into a four flagger operation. You better believe that communication is absolutely going to be a must so that when we're sending traffic one direction, somebody is not inadvertently sending the opposing traffic into it. We have to do our best to control this very cautiously and safely. So with our roundabouts, with our circular intersections, we know that many times advanced planning is absolutely going to be recommended. Something that I did in the past, and I encourage all my local public agencies to do, is if you have circular intersections, you have these roundabouts, single lanes, multi-lanes, let this be a great opportunity for you to sit down with your staff and do some tabletop exercises. Maybe it's raining today and you don't have a whole lot going on and you were just going to put them in the garage to do some housekeeping and truck cleaning. Go on your GIS site. If you don't have GIS through Esri or something like that, go to your county auditor site and print off a satellite view of your particular intersection, your particular roundabout, and then sit down and say, okay, team, how would we handle this? Let's prescribe and pretend that maybe there is a situation that happens right here, like you see in TA 52. How would we set this work zone up? And if you can go through those things, even though it's a tabletop exercise, you're still going to build some understanding and some confidence. So when something does happen in real life, and maybe it's an emergency that you're responding to that's going to provide make you have to do some type of maintenance measure, you're already going to have a little bit of an understanding. We know that when we're dealing with roundabouts and even single lanes, we'll even consider looking at doing full and partial closures versus doing detours. Maybe it's a point where you're not real comfortable with it and you want to do a detour instead to completely close the intersection and reroute traffic. The MUTCD would walk you through the appropriate measures for how to safely and legally deploy your detours. So those are things to consider. If you would like to find further information, there are some other typical applications available in the newest rendition of the MUTCD, but you can also look at workzonesafety.org and you can go to the National Work Zone Safety Clearinghouse for more information on these topics. Further special situations for us to consider as we may be out doing flagging is what if we have ourselves set up with a work zone and we are somewhere near a railway? You have a railroad crossing. Now, maybe for my spacing and the work that we're going to do, and I lay everything out, let's just say, take a look at the picture on your screen. You see the south, that flagger to the south for northbound traffic. Maybe legitimately they could actually be stationed up there on the north end of those tracks. That would be an improper flagging location. And this is why. This is one of those times where you're going to want to take that tangent line of your work zone, that straight section that's going down the double yellow line, and extend it and make it much longer. Put your flagging location south of those tracks, because here's what we don't want to have happen. We don't want traffic to get queued up and to potentially get stopped on the tracks and then have a train coming through. That would be very bad. I think we can all agree. So one very quick and easy safety measure is to extend that tangent section. Basically, you're making a very long buffer section prior to the work area, placing your flaggers south of those tracks as you see it drawn in the typical application. Now, as the approaching traffic is stopped, there is no possible way that they're ever going to get placed on the tracks where they're not able to completely go all the way across those tracks. So be very safe with those things and think about that. Also, I mentioned the downloadable apps that are available. The Railroad has a very nice app that you can find on the App Store as well. Within the app, it will give you addresses to the GIS links to all of your rail crossings that are in your community. It gives you all the background, who the owners are, and they ask us to do this one thing. If you're going to have a work zone that is going to be potentially impacting a rail crossing, to just notify them. Let them know what you're doing, what it is, and the day and the time that you're going to be there. If they deem it to be something that is a little bit more critical, they're going to assist you by sending somebody out, more than likely, that's going to stand there or sit there at the edge of the work zone off the road, and they're going to have constant communication with that train engineer. And so they're going to be able to come out and say, hey, fellas, I just talked to the engineer. Train is expected to pass, let's say, in 15 minutes. So go ahead and get the work zone clear. You're able to clear all of your equipment, all your supplies, all your personnel, get everybody clear of the train crossing so that when the train comes through unencumbered and unimpacted, and everybody's much safer. Continuing talking about our special situations as our night operations. And we've already talked about this a couple of different ways, especially when we were talking about our reflective garments. But with night operations, our procedures are generally going to be the same thing as daytime operations with a few equipment changes. And some of these things you and I had already kind of identified. We talked about having a flashlight with a glow cone, or maybe taking a lantern that's out, making sure that we have the proper ANSI reflective vest. And we said that was part 3 for nighttime operations. Having that retro reflective paddle, the stop and slow paddle, so that it's better seen. And if this is planned work, you have to have auxiliary lighting. So having some type of a light plant out to illuminate the flagger locations so that they can be seen properly to be able to be kept safe. Take a look at our flagger here. This will also kind of aid us and maybe a little bit of a review. Notice the vest that our flagger has on. What classification is that? If you're thinking ANSI Class 2, you're absolutely right. But now look what else our flagger is wearing since it's nighttime operation. He has an approved Class C garment on, rather they're rain pants or a highway pant. So this flagger is still very effective and safe and doing what is legally responsible. Notice the location where they're at. He's got his stop and slow paddle. He's got it attached to a post. There is a light plant that's illuminating his position. They're using the barricade style channelization devices, but this is the type of thing that we're talking about. We have to make sure that we're doing everything safe and legal. Let's continue talking about our special situations to consider. What about the times that we find ourselves in a position where now we're at a signalized intersection? What should we do? What's going to be best? What's required? What is prohibited? So signalized intersections in the workspace can uh, be a very special thing, a very special situation. This is going to be the best use for your law enforcement officers. If you're going to find yourself having to work in or around a signalized intersection and you're in a position where you're talking about flagging operations, try to reach out to those leos, reach out to those deputies, see if you can get that help. But here's what we have when we start looking at our manual for uniform traffic control devices. You shall not flag traffic in a signalized intersection unless the traffic signal is completely inoperable or has been specifically set to a flashing red light. It is considered unsafe and it can confuse drivers due to the conflicting signals. So you have a regulatory device overhead. You have that signalizing device. And then you have a flagger standing down below it. It has a regulatory stop sign attached to their paddle. And which one does the driver listen to? Which one are they supposed to obey? You can see how that would be very conflicting and that it could cause issues very quickly. So use caution, make sure that you're abiding by the MUTCD, reach out to your local partners with your law enforcement officers to try to get you the additional help that you need if you're put in these situations. Additional special considerations, what we talk about is when we start getting into mobile operations. And flagging during mobile operations, usually we're talking about very low speeds, let's say 3 mile an hour or less. You can rely on mobile signs and periodically relocated stationary signs. Flaggers should be positioned far enough in advance of the work area to be able to warn and control motorists of that work zone and approaching hazards. And the visibility of the flaggers and safe flagging standards still apply as previously stated. So some folks think that just because we're in a moving and mobile operation now, that all these other things that we've identified through the manual, that they may not necessarily still apply, but they absolutely still do. You still have to make sure that you're standing alone away from all other vehicles. You still have to make sure that you're standing on the shoulder of the roadway. You have to make sure that you're highly visible. All the things that we have previously discussed are still going to apply to flagging during moving and mobile operations. Consideration of visibility is going to always be a high concern. Think about those hills, think about those curves. We were discussing that. If we were in a moving and mobile operation and now we're approaching a curve, even though the moving mobile operation, whatever that work area is, has now left the curve, Now maybe they have gotten down into the lower parts of the hill and they're starting to get further away from us. If the flagger does not have a safe amount of room to go ahead and go on through the curve and reset up, or go ahead and go, over the hill and kind of maybe approaching the next hill to be able to set up again, they need to retain their original location, because you don't want to have a situation where the approaching vehicles are surprised by you as they're entering and exiting a curve, or as they're coming over the top of a hill and dropping back down into the next dip. Always make sure that visibility is that primary concern. Hold those positions back. If that means that you have a much larger and longer tangent section that starts to separate, then that's what you're going to end up with. But you've got to be able to protect the flaggers. You have to be able to protect the public. We also talked about shaded areas. Think about the shaded areas versus the blinding sun. Those are things to consider. All of us that's had to flag in the past, we know that it can be very hard on us when we're out flagging in the summertime. It's very hot. And when you finally get yourself where you're standing underneath of a shade tree, it's not air conditioning, but it'll do, because you finally get the sun off the back of your neck. Listen, if you're flagging and you're in that situation, you have got to be mindful of something, that the approaching cars are driving in that same blinding sun. Chances are they've got their visors down. They have sunglasses on. They still may even have their hand up on their steering wheel trying to block even more of that sun coming through the windshield. And now they're approaching you. And here you are standing in a dark shaded area trying to get a little bit of relief from that sun. There is a very good chance that they are not going to see you at all. So make sure that you're considering that. Put yourself in a position to always be visible to your approaching traffic. Protect yourself, communicate as effectively as possible. Additional or adding additional tangent area may be required to be able to safely control your motorist coming through. So keep these things in mind so that you're protecting yourself to the utmost.
Time check.
Yeah, as I say, I think we're probably approaching that time to give you a break. Let us go ahead and take another intermission. We'll go for 10 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll finish up our last few remaining slides. So we've got 10:43. Let's meet back at 10:53. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that little break time there to kind of get resettled, but we'll jump back in here, start moving back through our safe flagger operations. Before we move into the handful of our few remaining slides, we will have time at the end of the webinar to be able to ask some questions. So if you've got some burning questions that you really want to know, go ahead and take the time to type them into the chat. We'll try to review them and answer the ones that we can answer. Again, you can also grab my email and send me an email with maybe your specific details if you're needing help or you're looking for, some additional training or something like that. Go ahead and reach out to me one-on-one and I'll do my best to get back with you. But if you've got burning questions and you want to go ahead and put that in the chat now, we'll try to take a few of those at the end of our presentation and answer them. If not, you'll be free to go. So let's jump back in here. And now, as a reminder, we were just going through and we were talking about flagging during mobile operations. And one of the things that I realize is that there are lots of variables when we're talking about local public agencies, whether it's a township, it's a county, it's a village, it's a municipality, a city. There's lots of different variables that we fall into, lots of different things that we see. And what's the best way to set it up? Sometimes it's not a prescribed method that I can give you, something that is absolutely cookie cutter. There's going to be things that you're going to be making adaptations to typical applications. But I refer back to our first beginning slides. Know your manual. Know the manual for uniform traffic control devices. Review the Ohio Supplemental Manual. And remember that if you're making an adaptation to the typical application, make sure you're not making something that is now a violation. Just like we just previously said here with moving and mobile operations, that typically it's going to be the exact same thing as stationary. And everything that we talked about so far is still going to apply. So being off the road, standing alone, being on the shoulder of that roadway, away from other vehicles, away from the work area, having the signage that's out, being highly visible, everything is still going to apply to those situations. But if you're ever presented with something that maybe you're planning for a job that's coming up, you're not real sure what to do, please feel free to reach out to me. Actually, even had one of our local Central Ohio communities reach out to me one time with a question for a job site that they were going to have to do for a fire hydrant repair. So if I can help you as your safety circuit rider, I'll do my best to be able to help you with those things. We know that the additional special situations to consider when we're talking about our moving and mobile operations is shadow vehicles. Having shadow vehicles equipped with warning signs for mobile operations are highly advisable, and they're going to be required for high-speed roadways. So let's think back to that again just a minute. We were talking about going in and doing a road repair. Maybe we're doing moving a mobile operation and we're dealing with hills and we're dealing with curves. And I said sometimes, depending on the amount of curves and hills that you've got, that flagger may have to retain his or her position on the edge of that roadway in advance of the hill, in advance of the curve, while that working procession is moving further and further and further away. This is where shadow vehicles, another way that they are going to be very helpful, because now you can still keep a shadow vehicle that's going to be sitting right with the actual work area where the mobile work is going on, and they will be able to be there to be kind of that buffer, if you will, especially if they have a truck mounted attenuator on them as well. Truck mounted attenuators are highly advisable. Typically, when we see typical applications, they may be listed as optional. But again, even if you're choosing a typical application that has something listed and it says that it's optional, that doesn't mean you don't have to do it. It's going to be highly advised that you still do to be able to provide that necessary protection. The shadow vehicles on the back of your shadow vehicle, having the appropriate warning sign, even something as small as thinking about going out and doing roadside mowing, that you've got a truck that's following the tractors while they're making their first initial cut on the edge of that roadway, and maybe the sign on the back of that truck says road machinery ahead or mowing ahead. This is the type of thing that we're talking about. But your shadow vehicles being equipped are very helpful. If you decide that you're going to use an arrow board, I want you to understand you have to be excessively cautious with this. I know that lots of local public agencies, all the pickup trucks have somewhat of a small arrow board that's mounted to them. They might be a 48 inch or they might be a 60-inch arrow board. We like to try to use them in addition to the strobes and the light bars that we have. But if you're going to use that arrow board, make sure it's in a caution mode, four corner caution to be precisely, because you don't want to do anything that's going to prevent visibility of that flagger. If you look at TA10, typical application number 10, flagging operations on a two-lane roadway, it does not show an arrow panel anywhere in that drawing. And that is why we don't want to have such large devices out there that they're overriding the control of that flagger. The flagger is that primary control for that roadway. So when cars are approaching and they see the signs, hey, they're advised that there's a problem ahead, road work ahead. What's the problem? Well, there's one lane road ahead. Okay, what am I going to do? Oh, there's a flagging sign. Here's the flagger. And now you have that next space of whatever it was, 100 or 350 or 500 foot. And now you have your flagger stationed. And so we don't want to have a very large arrow board sitting there that is very bright, drawing the attention away from the flagger operations. That's why it's not drawn. If you still forego that, I am advising you to be extremely cautious with that. That is why TA10 does not show it. We want to make sure that we are retaining the best opportunity for the safest and legal control of the roadway with anything that we're doing when it comes to work zones. Additional special considerations. How about emergency vehicles or fire apparatus, EMS, law enforcement officers? Have you ever been out flagging on a job site and while you were flagging, you were surprised by an approaching emergency vehicle? That can be very scary for the flaggers. That can be very scary for the approaching fire and EMS folks that are coming up the roadway, or the law enforcement officer. There's a few things that we need to think about in the event that we are presented with something just like that. When they're approaching, try to allow them the right of way absolutely as soon as possible, but stop them if it's not safe to allow passage. Let me play this out and kind of paint a picture in your mind. If you're doing a flagging operation and you have active traffic in that work zone that is going to be opposing the safety vehicle that is coming through, and it could end up being a head-on collision, and there's no way for them to be able to safely pass, hold your stop sign out, but communicate very quickly to your opposite flagger. Hey, I've got an emergency vehicle up here that's fast approaching me. Stop your traffic. Don't let any more in here. And whatever that last car is, as soon as that last car is out of the work area, then get the fire, get the emergency vehicles, the law enforcement officer, give them the right of way so that they can get through the work zone to respond to wherever it is that they're going. But here's a better approach. Plan ahead. What's one of the ways that we know that fire, emergency, police, and those folks are coming toward us? Typically, you hear them. You hear them before you see them. Remember, we talked in the first several slides that we talked about what the must do's are, that a flagger must be able to do these things. Okay, the flagger needs to be paying attention to all the different things that are potentially going on, and one of those are using, the ability to listen. And so as they're listening, and if I'm flagging and I think I hear emergency vehicles approaching my location, I am already going to be planning ahead. I'm going to go ahead and on my radio call my opposite flagger. I'm going to say, hey, I think I hear emergency vehicles coming this way. Go ahead and stop your traffic. I'm going to keep my lane open and let's see if they actually come. Well, then, sure enough, here comes around the curve or over the hill. Here comes your emergency vehicles, your fire, EMS, your law enforcement officer. Now they're able to proceed on as they're already traveling. We're not hindering them, causing delay to an emergency response. And there's no opportunity for us to have a head on collision in the middle of that work area, all because the flagger was paying attention and planning ahead. That is going to be your best response when it comes to dealing with these types of things. How about handling emergency situations? So we know lots of times with the work that we're doing in our local public agencies that there's a lot of things that could potentially go wrong. And we're taught to basically anticipate the unexpected. And sometimes that's sad to say, but sometimes the unexpected happens. But you've got to be prepared to respond. What happens? What are we going to do? If we're out here working and we have a roadway departure and a car goes off the road, maybe they go through the work zone and maybe they go out into the field and they roll over. I know what's going to happen because we're all going to have a sense of responsibility. This adrenaline dump is going to hit your body. You're going to want to be a good Samaritan and run out there to them to see if there's something that you can quickly do. But if you're the flagger, listen to me. The flagger has to continue to control the roadway. Be prepared to respond, but you still got to protect yourself. Now we're going to talk about flagging escapes on the next slide, but I want you to hear this. If the roadway is still open for travel, you still have to control that traffic. The workers that are in that work area, they can run out and try to administer help. They can call for, fire and EMS. But if your roadway is open, you have to make sure that you're maintaining control of that. Now, on the topic of having a flag or escape routes are this. You never stand where you cannot escape the roadway. So that vehicle's coming up the roadway, maybe something's happening that there's going to actually have something where there's a roadway departure or a crash. I don't want to be flagging from a position where I cannot safely escape the road. That's like bridges and overpasses. If I'm on a bridge, regardless how high it is or an overpass, my only option to get off that roadway is going to be to go off the bridge. I think you can all agree with me that that ain't happening, right? So don't put yourself in that position. Don't cross a bridge and be flagging on that bridge. How about high guardrails? Sometimes there's high guardrails, there's PCB walls, concrete barrier walls, and I'm getting up there in age. I'm not as froggy and jumpy as I used to be. I am not going to be flagging next to something like that and then put myself in a position to now not be able to clear that roadway and get clear off the road to be able to protect myself. So those are the things that you have to consider. Always set yourself up to be able to have a safe flagging escape route in the event. Remember, we talked about anticipating the unexpected in the event that something bad would happen. Give yourself that opportunity to be able to clear the roadway. And as you're clearing the roadway with your own flag or escape, remember what one of those other must was that we have to do. You've got to be able to have a way to warn the other workers that are in the work area of the same danger that is approaching. That's where we talked about what will we put in our toolbox? What will we have in a toolkit that is a low cost safety measure to try to keep us safer? And we talked about like having that air horn, something that we can notify them so that, hey, listen, this semi truck's approaching, it's not stopping. Maybe its brakes have failed. You're escaping the roadway, you're blowing the air horn, you're notifying the workers in the work area so that they are able to now escape the roadway too. It's all in an effort to keep all of us safe so that we are trying to reduce, minimize, and completely eliminate the work zone serious injuries and fatalities. Now, you heard me talking about handling these emergency situations. Let's say something bad happens. We're talking about anticipating the unexpected, and now something happens. Obviously, we want to call for help. You want to call 911 as soon as it's feasible to do it, notifying your supervisor so that they know, so that they're able to respond and come out to see what's going on, trying to document the things that are happening. Right. Remember to protect yourself first and foremost. But now that the crash has happened, what do we do? Do we drop the flagstaff and forget about the roadway? Do we run off out into the bean field with a drop of adrenaline because we're trying to be a good Samaritan while now the traffic and the roadway is unattended? We can't do that. You've got to continue to control your traffic because here's the problem. This is what happens. Now you've got this crash, and maybe the crash was a roadway departure, and it's bad, right? I mean, crashes are never a good thing. So now you're dealing with this crash, but now you're going to have a roadway that is unprotected and uncontrolled by flaggers. Now you have vehicles that are still going to be driving up that roadway, potentially opposing one another for an additional head-on collision. And you know as well as I do that when drivers see a crash, what do we all do? We're guilty of it. We rubberneck. People are turning to try to see what's going on, see whatever the carnage is, whatever happened. And now you have that opportunity for secondary crashes. The things that you start studying through safety and you start looking back statistically at crashes and things that happen on the roadways and on job sites is that a typically that first crash ends up just being statistically some type of a property damage. But your secondary crashes statistically become more severe, if not fatal. So at this point, now what you're doing is you're trying to control or eliminate the opportunity for there to be a secondary crash. So listen, control that traffic, continue to control that roadway. Yes, there are going to be other people that are present. Somebody else can run out to that car that maybe left the roadway and crashed. They're able to call for help. They're able to do these things. But flaggers control the traffic, control the roadway, continue to protect everybody that's relying on you. So also, we talked about the flagger staying in contact with other flaggers. Make sure that communication stays in link. Now, I've got some links here that were to YouTube. Excuse me. We're not going to play them. You are more than welcome to go to YouTube and you can simply put in different things that talk about like flagging operations, crashes that have involved flaggers. And just like I said in a couple of the previous slides, that on average, there are 20 flaggers that unfortunately lose their lives in crashes while they're in the course of doing their work. And these are just three different videos, not fatalities, but very serious accidents that impacted flaggers while they were out trying to do their operations. So I hope that you take all of these things that we've talked about today, that you take them to heart, that you begin to apply them. If you are in search of additional training, to reach out to me as your safety circuit rider, reach out to the Ohio LTAP Center and some of the other resources that we've provided to you to have those additional training opportunities. Well, now we're going to jump into just a real quick review as we approach the end of our presentation here today. Remember, we talked about the importance of the visibility of all workers, the importance of making sure that we are still wearing the approved ANSI garment for that daytime or nighttime that we're working in. We said we have to be an ANSI Class 2 for daytime operations, 50 mile an hour or less. This is a shall, this is not a should. Then you have ANSI Class 3. ANSI Class 3 is going to be for speed limits above 50 mile an hour or any time that we're working at nighttime. So please make sure that you abide by this. This is one of the leading citations that local public agencies are facing when something happens and PERP has to investigate. We talked about correct temporary traffic control devices and utilizing those typical applications. Make sure that you're doing that. Make sure you have the proper devices on the roadway. I shared with you a bad story about something that happened with a crash where the road crew had non-reflective devices mingled in with reflective devices, and how during the day, those devices being very close together made their work zone actually a lot safer because the spacing between them was much less than what that maximum spacing allowed for. However, that change that they made, that adaptation to that work zone that was good during the daytime, it became a violation at night. So if anytime you're in the roadway at nighttime, retroreflective devices, use them the correct way, put them at the correct spacing that the manual lists out. And then your typical applications, we talked about those. Get in the habit of going and looking at them regardless if you're doing two-lane flagging or if you're working on multi-lane. There are so many different drawings of typical applications to help make our work zones safer, to give you that starting point, to be able to see a deployment of what's going to be required. With those typical applications, make sure you go back and read the standard and the guidance and that support and options information to help you be able to lay out exactly what your work zone is going to be for that particular application and then deploy it. So get in the habit of doing those things. Remember, we talked about proper communication, proper control for all road users. When we talked about the flaggings, these things were not should do, it was a shall. This is how, if you're going to be flagging, that your communication shall conform to the MUTCD. So make sure that we're doing those things. Make sure that we're doing everything that is appropriate when we're out there on the roadway. And just again, because it's one of the biggest violations, as I previously stated, retro-reflective devices for all nighttime operations. Be familiar with the MUTCD and also with the MUTCD, that Ohio supplemental, which, as I shared with you before, you can download and print your own copies off of the Ohio Department of Transportation's webpage. And if you have your own local regulations that are in substantial conformance with the MUTCD and the Ohio supplemental, know your local regulations as well. Do what we're supposed to do so that we're as safe as absolutely possible and legal. Our flagging resources that we've kind of talked about a couple things as we went through today's presentation. I've encouraged you to take advantage of the Ohio LTAP Center's website. We have so many resources that are available for you, and many resources are absolutely free of charge. Circuit rider classes, free of charge. E-learning, free of charge. Downloadable printable items, free of charge. Take advantage of these things because we want to try to help you be more effective, be more efficient, but most importantly, we want you to be safe. Downloading copies of that MUTCD and the Ohio Supplemental are available. We have technical assistance updates with RON updates that are out there, many different topics that are available, even things to help you with like tailgate safety talks. The Ohio Department of Transportation website has many resources that are available for you as well. And we also reference our workzonesafety.org. All these things presented to you in an effort to help you be more knowledgeable and to be more safe as you're out working in your work zone operations. Now, with that said, that's going to bring us to the end of the webinar presentation. You've got some time back in your day. If you would like to have some questions answered, this will be the time. I'll turn it back over to Kara so she can review. If you've got anything that's maybe more in depth and you want to reach out to me electronically, please copy and paste my email from the chat and feel free to communicate with me one-on-one. Kara, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. That was wonderful. Okay, so we just have a couple of questions so far, so please feel free to put any questions that you have in the question panel. Our first question, we have someone that's describing a little bit of a location. So it's a low volume township road, unmarked speed limits, low speed under 3 miles per hour mobile work zone, multiple driveway access points in the mobile work zone straightaway. So that's the foundation. This person says we currently use the one flagger mode until hills and curves are encountered. Are we legally covered for this type of scenario?
I will not speak to confirm or deny you being legally responsible for a particular scenario. However, what I will say is to be familiar with the typical applications. There are a couple of different typical applications that are in there that we can utilize, especially for those low speed, very low volume roadways when it comes to flagging operations. There's even a typical application for a no flagging where you're using basically a yield and the advanced work zone signage. Now that would be a very specific situation, but some communities that have absolutely no traffic and no speed issues to deal with have actually used that. There's a typical application for it, but typically you're going to be looking at TA10. Look at the TA10, and I think what you're doing sounds to be very good, utilizing a single flagger operation where areas are straightaway. You're moving so that it's changing. You've got low speeds, you've got low traffic amounts, if any at all. And then I like the fact that you said that unless we're encountering hills, so when you get into hills and curves, now you realize the need to be able to deploy that second flagger to be able to have communication. Just make sure that you're doing that, have that proper communication so that you know that you're always compliant with that. Something else that typically gets foregone when it comes to moving and mobile, and maybe this will pertain to the person who asked this question, is the signage. I still encourage putting out signage, even if you know that you're only going to be there for 15 minutes or less. More sometimes is still better, especially when it comes to communication. We cannot hardly communicate enough because there's so much going on that our drivers are dealing with, so many distractions and so many other things. Still putting out your advanced warning signs, workers ahead, lane closed ahead, flagger ahead. And then as you're working through that area, you're deploying that work through that moving mobile operation. If you start getting way too far ahead of your signs, and there's not necessarily a rule of thumb, you just kind of think about it. If you're getting way too far ahead of those signs, recover the signs, redeploy the signs, and continue working. But I think the program that you've described is a pretty good program.
Great, thank you, Gary. All right, our next question. What color cones are required for work zones? Many colors are offered, but what is legally required?
I apologize, but I do not have that answer right off. Reach out to me and email. I will follow up with you. I know that I have seen the high vis green and I have seen high vis orange, which is the one that we typically have. We also see this question come up when it comes to PPE and the color of our vests and the safety apparel that we're wearing. And the guidance that I have read about when it comes to that is just trying to have something that is in contrast to the environment that we're working in. So for some communities and times of the year, a high vis fluorescent orange may be maybe the contrast that they need. Whereas, many times we see the high vis green. And the reason we went to high vis green as a regulation is for that contrast point. Because if you're out working on the roadway and all of your cones are orange, barrels are orange, everything's orange, and now you're out there and you're wearing an orange vest, you're going to blend in and be just another cone or barrel on the roadway. So having something that is contrasting is what is going to be the importance there. Now, on the other side of that, just kind of thinking through this process myself, if now everything was high vis green, isn't it kind of the same way? So, what I have read about has been about contrast, but to tell you what is absolutely the legal and best choice, I can't speak to that right away. But I know when it comes to the topic of PPE and those things, it's contrasting colors to communicate the most effective way to the road user.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have another question from someone who would like to know, Gary, if these slides for this presentation will be available for review. So do you
So,
make these
as
public?
well, as you stated in the very beginning, for everybody, the presentation, it was recorded, and the presentation will be available to view through our YouTube link. So if that's what you're looking for, absolutely, you'll have it that way. If there's something else that you're looking for, like the actual slide program itself, to be able to maybe utilize it in-house, that's something that if I'm approved, I would be willing to share with you.
Wonderful. Then I will let everyone know with the appropriate approvals. If we are able to share this presentation, I will go ahead and send that out as a PDF when I send out the link to the recording. So just know that if we are able to share it with you, we will share the PDF with you. And if it's not in the email with the link to the YouTube recording, then we were unable to share it with you. Let's see here. Let's see here. Next question. Oh, someone would like for you, Gary, to put back the slide that has the QR code for the guide so that they
Okay,
can go ahead and scan that code.
absolutely. There you go.
Awesome. All right. Next question. If you add high-vis stickers like dot tape or hard hats that can be an add-on to make it class 3 with your class 2 vest.
So I get that question quite a bit when we're doing our in-person classes because there are some ball caps that are out there that people like to wear. They might be fluorescent green. They might have high vis material sewed into them. I actually take one with me as a reference when I teach. And just like you remember with the picture I showed you to look at the tag and see what the tag says, that you'll see the ANSI federal ID number. You're going to see what the classification is, if it's a 2, if it's a 3. But if you're using it for additional, trying to upgrade, it's got to say E. So if that additional garment that you're going to wear doesn't say 2 or 3 on its own, or if it doesn't say E, anti-class E, it is not an approved garment. Now you can still wear it. Obviously, you can wear it in an effort to try to be more visible and be more bright when you're out there, but it is not going to give you the necessary approval to be able to classify something that was maybe a class 2 vest to a class 3. You can wear your hat, but you're still going to be a class 2.
Right on. And this person is also mentioning that they know that there are black winter coats with high vis options on there and that they say that they're class 2. Are those allowed for legal work? I mean, they're asking legal. I don't know that you're going to give legal advice, but is that something that's appropriate for roadway work?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm definitely not going to do that as far as stating something's legal or not, unless I know matter of factly. Now, I have seen that there are some of these codes that are out there, even some of the uniform rental agencies that our communities are utilizing are providing garments that look like that. Sometimes they might be the dark navy blue or black, and they'll have some striping sewed into them. Kind of reminds you maybe of somebody that works in a mine, or things like that. I will refer back to the fact that it has to have the tag. The tag has to say it has to be supported by that federal ID number and have that ANSI classification of number 2 or number 3. Sometimes those articles do not have that. We actually just ran into that here several classes ago that I was having. One of the gentlemen, they were provided that type of clothing. We looked at it, and there was nothing inside the garment that said that it was an ANSI Class 2 or ANSI Class 3. Our colors that are approved for the roadway are going to be the fluorescent green, are going to be the fluorescent orange for the roadway. And that goes back to having the contrasting colors. And then again, having the tag on the inside of that garment that gives it its destination of being Class 2 or Class 3.
Sounds great. All right. Sounds like that's pretty important component then. As of right now, we have one last question. Um, and this question is, in general, what exceptions to the MUTCD are allowed during initial incident management?
Initial incident management. I'm trying to think about what they might mean by that. Let me look. I'm looking here at some slides just to kind of refer back to something here. Which one did I want to show you? Number 7. Let's go back and look at this real quick. So you talk about making alterations, and I talked about if you're going to make alterations to not or to make sure that it doesn't become a violation. Some of the alterations that we make, you're going to know a lot of that's going to be it's going to be communicated to you when you go in and you read the standard, the guidance, the options, and the support information. You're going to see some of those things, those alterations that can be made. Some additional alterations that can potentially be made. You're going to see, what the maximum spacing of cones are. Your maximum spacing of a cone is typically on a tangent section is going to be 2 times the speed limit. We know that that could get very far apart. So an alteration to make my work zone better would be to move those cones closer together. I can't exceed the maximum, but I can make them much closer together, make the cones much tighter and concise to communicate more. If we're on multi-lane roadways, maybe we opt to go with a longer taper. If we're on flagging operations, remember, very short, concise, 50 to 100 feet. Other type of application or alterations to applications that we might make is like we talked about with the spacing of our signage. I'm looking at the table, and the table tells me that for 40-mile-an-hour and below, urban low speed, my sign spacing is going to be 100 foot of spacing. But I know for a fact that even though my regulatory speed limit says 35, that everybody's running 45 and 50. I can make an alteration and go ahead and put those signs out at 350 feet spacing or up to that in an effort to provide the speeding motorist more time to read, to perceive, and to react to what they just saw with the signs that are out there. That would be approved alterations. But again, you want to get familiar and get comfortable with the MUTCD, with the Ohio Supplemental. Primarily, we're talking about Part 6 temporary traffic control applications. Be familiar with that. So when you're talking about making an alteration, your alteration doesn't put you in a position to be a violation.
All right, right on. Okay, I am seeking clarification for a question that came in, um, because the beginning of the question, this person is asking you, Gary, if you can bring up the slide that talked about flagging at an intersection. So I am working on getting some clarification if they just want to see it again or if they have a question that goes along with that slide, but they're hoping to
Oh,
see. the slide that talked about flagging at an intersection.
Okay, I'm going back to find it here. Okay, here's the slide when we talked about the intersections, special considerations. Signalized intersections in a workspace. This is going to be the best use of law enforcement officers. And you shall not flag traffic in a signalized intersection unless the traffic signal is completely inoperable or it has been specifically set to a flashing red light. Typically, what I would have done for my community that I was in is if we had to work in or around an intersection, something like this had happened, it was best bet, especially if it was inoperable. Let's say power goes down, there's something that's wrong with it, and now we've got to be in there to do some type of work, was to haul out stop signs, temporary stop signs, make it an all stop to help control that traffic. So you get your all stop signs out there, and then you're performing, whatever you have. But when we're talking about intersections, especially when we're talking about intersections that might even be a little bit busier, it's going to be the best use to try to utilize a law enforcement officer to be able to help you stay safe. The problem is that if you've got an active intersection signal that is working, it is going to trump necessarily, from my understanding of talking to our folks in transportation, it is going to trump that flagger that is actually flagging. You're not going to be able to flag over top of it. It's going to basically take that primary control away from you. Now, if it's taking primary control and me as a driver, who do I listen to? Do I listen to the flagger that's telling me to go, that's telling me to stop or go slow? Or do I listen to the traffic device overhead that's now saying it's green or it's red or it's yellow? And so that's the problem. Now, have they provided you any further detail to their question?
So they're asking where they can find that in the MUTCD.
Send me an email and I will help you search it. If you want to start search it without sending it to me, and for me to share it back with you through email, when you go to the Ohio LTAP Center and you click on the postcard to be able to download the manuals are going to take you to Ohio Department of Transportation's website. On the right side of the screen, there's going to be two links to click on. One is going to be the federal manual, and the one below that is going to be the Ohio supplemental below that. When you open up the federal manual, it's actually pretty nice when you get into it because you're going to have a ribbon that opens up on the left side of your screen that's going to then break down all of those parts, part one, part two, all the way through the very end, including appendices. So you'll be able to kind of go in it. There's also a search option at the top of the screen, top right. There should be a little search window there that once you're inside of one of those articles, you can then type in the key word that'll help go through it, and it will peruse the entire chapter for you so that you can very quickly go through and glean the information that you're looking for.
Wonderful. Okay, well, it looks like though that was the last of our questions. So I do believe we might be nearing the end of our presentation. Anything else that you would like to mention to our attendees, Gary?
Just thank you. This was a great response. We had well over 300 attendees today. I appreciate that everybody was cued in today to this. This is a very huge safety training that we need to definitely take to heart and do better, especially when we see many times that the number of serious incidents and fatalities are happening. As a reminder, please reach out to your Ohio LTAP Center. We are here to try to help you, and you can reach out to me personally as your safety circuit rider if you're wanting to schedule face-to-face classes for work zone, flagger operations, PPE, snow and ice operations for operators and managers. We're here to try to help you. My contact information is back on the screen for you again, my direct dial as well as my email. Again, thank you, and please stay safe.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, everyone. So, just a couple of final reminders as we sign off. Keep an eye on your inbox. We'll be sending out the link to the session recording to all of our registered attendees very soon. And if you are logged in and present for the full duration of the webinar, you'll receive a certificate of attendance within 5 business days. If we are able to share a PDF of the presentation, that will also be in that email that we send out to all of our attendees. And just as we close out, there will be a super short 4-question survey that'll pop up in your browser. If you have 60 seconds, please let us know your thoughts. It really helps us fine tune these programs for you. Um, Thank you all so much for being with us today. We hope you're walking away with some great insights for your work. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next one.